Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Things have been a little bit crazy for me the last week or so. Had some power outages, 2 within a week. Yeah, that was fun. But we're here, we're back, and we're going to continue reading To All Things an End. Before we start, for those of you who were... Hey, Madison! Welcome in! Very funny, Harpex. No, we legit had 2 power outages last week. It was kind of insane. We lost power Thursday morning, I think about 4:30, and got it back Friday at 2, and then lost it again for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. But it took took longer than that for the internet to come back on Saturday night. But we're back, and hopefully things are solid. So, here we are. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be back with my internet. That was, I didn't realize how much I depend on that until it's not there. So, I'm just doing a little bit of adjusting here. Before we actually get started with reading... Hey, Demon! All these familiar names in my chat. I appreciate you guys. For those of you who may not have been here on my last stream, which I think was 4 or 5 days ago? Something like that. I can't even keep track. Give me a second. I can check. Let's see. But anyway, for those of you who were not here the last stream or two, sorry, I'm trying to keep up with chat. I apologize. I promise I love you all equally. I promise. I'm just trying to keep track of things and I'm a little scattered, so I do apologize. Yeah, so thank you for everybody that's here. I really appreciate you. For those of you who were not here the last couple of streams, we have started reading To All Things an End, which is the first part of the second series called the Sith Duology. And we got through all the way through chapter 6 last time. So we read chapters 1 to 3, and then we read chapters 4 to 6. And tonight we're going to start with chapter 7. As you should be. Yes. Alright. Now, behave. I know you guys mostly all know each other. Yeah, I was doing laundry earlier, so I feel that. And for anybody who is relatively new If you have missed any of my streams, you can scroll on down to the About section in my panels, and all of my VODs are linked in on YouTube. If they are no longer hosted on Twitch, I have tried to port them all to YouTube for later viewing. I have also considered perhaps converting them to podcast for easier listening. So I'm still working on that. So I will keep you apprised. No, right? And I do have a chat bot in here. If you guys are curious about the commands, you can find those down below as well. There are some commands for the chatbot. There are also some commands for our cute little cat friend on the bottom there. So those are down at the bottom. Alright. Are there any questions regarding anything we've read in the last couple of streams before I get started? Just so that hopefully I can answer them and people won't be confused. So... All right. If there are no further questions, let's dive right in. To All Things an End, Chapter 7. I'm actually going to turn that down just a smidge because it's in my ears. There we go. Well, okay. Trying to not drown myself out with the tunage. So it's a delicate balance because I'm wearing headphones. So I hear it a little bit louder than probably you guys do. So I am there. Okay. Alrighty. To All Things an End, Chapter 7. Their duty complete, Mick and Brink retreated from the kitchen, close to shooing them away so she could work in relative peace. Brink flung himself onto the sofa in the living area and propped his booted feet up on the low table in front of the holoprojector. He sipped at his whiskey and leaned back into the soft confines of the plush couch. "You know, Mick," he said, his eyes closed and a content little smile on his face, "I think you've come back just in time. With all that's been going on in the galaxy, with Ari's job eating her alive, there's so much bad. With you here, I feel like maybe, just maybe, this galaxy isn't quite as dark as I thought it was." Micron stared out the plate glass doors leading onto the balcony. The suns were beginning to set, and the sky was every shade of orange and purple. The rogue smiled, a sad sort of smile. "Thanks, Brink," he said. "No pressure, right?" Silence answered. "Right, Brink?" Micron turned and suppressed a laugh. The old smuggler had fallen asleep, his glass of whiskey still in his hand and a content expression on his face. Without a word, Micron slid open the glass doors and stepped out into the fresh air. The sounds and lights of Coruscant at dusk rushed in on him like a tidal wave of sensation. He loved this world. Sure, go deep enough and Coruscant showed you just how ugly the seedier parts of the galaxy could be. But there was still life, so much life, crammed onto one rock. The Force didn't just exist here, it thrived. Mick closed the doors and lit a stick of tobacco. He set his whiskey on the patio table and went to the railing, leaning on it and staring at the sea of Coruscant activity at dusk. "Yup," he thought. "I can sense you out there. I know what you want. I know you aim to plunge this galaxy into your dark utopia. I don't hate you for it. It's just your nature. But you fail to calculate something using your equations. See, my friends and family call this galaxy home. By setting your goal, you've placed them in harm's way, which is unforgivable. I will stop you. I'll be here, waiting. So make your move. Strike hard and swift. I'm ready for you. And, my unknown enemy, I can assure you that you have never come up against anything quite like me. Ari ran her hand over the sensor plate and stepped into the past for what felt like the 100th time that day. Migron stood out on the balcony, the sunset casting the rogue in silhouette in a pose that she'd seen a million times before, his hands resting easily on the railing, the varnish worn smooth beneath his hands from years of doing just that. He had always loved that balcony. He'd said it helped him think. How he could think clearly in the ride of Coruscant Sky I may never know, Ari thought with a smile. But that's just you, isn't it, Rogue? She swiped at a tear and stifled a laugh when she saw Brink snoring away on the couch and put her datapad and notes on the hall table. She heard Callista in the kitchen and could smell the beginnings of dinner. She'd help the young woman in a moment, but first... Hey, Poetic Side, welcome in! She hurried to the bedroom and tore out of the military uniform she'd been wearing all day. She cast the clothes on a chair in the corner and pulled open her wardrobe. Then she pulled on a pair of loose-fitting pants and a civilian shirt in a shade of blue that matched her eyes. She shook her hair out of the tight bun she'd been wearing under her officer's cap and pulled it back into a loose ponytail tied with a piece of blue ribbon. She then checked herself in the mirror and was pleased that age had not softened her figure. She crept through the living area. Brink was still snoring, and she slipped past him onto the balcony. She closed the doors quietly behind her and looked at the rogue. He still had his back to her, and Ari slowly moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head on his shoulder before breathing in his scent. Oh, how I've missed that, Rogue. Mick chuckled. And I was afraid I wouldn't smell that great, he said, turning in her arms to lean back on the railing and wrap his own around her. I haven't had a chance to hit the fresh air yet. Micron. Ari looked into his deep brown eyes and traced her hand along the scar on his left cheek. Words left her. She felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in ages. At first, she wasn't sure what was happening, and it scared her momentarily. But the sensation grew stronger, and she recognized it at last. The phoenix was awakening. She'd found her mate again, and the joy spread through Ari like fire. It was a sensation she was intimately familiar with, and yet she hadn't felt it in so long that it startled her with its strength. Cautiously, tentatively, she reached out in the force. Her presence mingled with Mix and was like a vortex within the force. Phoenix and Rogue danced to a tune that only they could hear in the cool night air. When they finally parted, the great bird settled inside Ari. His presence cooled but didn't vanish. The comforting warmth lingered, content within her, and she felt better than she had in, well, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt like this. Hello to you too, Princess. Hey there. Ari blushed. When was the last time I blushed? So, big dinner tonight? Ari laughed. You always did a lot of thinking with your stomach. She hugged the rogue closer. Yes, sweetie. And I should probably help Callista with the food. The poor girl's probably in a state cooking for so many people. Don't stay out here too long, Rogue. I'll be in a minute, Micron said. Just collecting my thoughts. Okay. Ari slid open the door into the house. Don't you vanish on me again. Never, the rogue said, his eyes locking with hers. She didn't know how, but somehow she knew without a shadow of a doubt that there was never a truer word spoken. Micron Din would never leave her again. Smiling to herself, she went to the kitchen. Stefan, Einar, and Andrea would be arriving soon. Tell her hi for me. Callista had heard Ari enter the apartment, and a soft smile touched her lips as she watched the general make her way to the bedroom and then the balcony where Micron stood. Those two, she thought to herself as she watched them for a moment before returning to the pot on the stove, adding various spices to the soup she had made from the tubers. The scent of the herbs wafted through the kitchen momentarily as the steam rose from the pot. It would keep for a moment. Turning from the stove, she quietly made her way to the living room and covered Brink with a blanket that had been draped over the couch, setting his glass carefully on the coffee table. Then she returned to the kitchen. As she began spooning the soup into bowls, she heard Ari re-enter from the balcony. A moment later, she entered the kitchen. "Good evening, General," Callista greeted her, passing her a hot cup of caf that she'd been keeping warm. "The soup is finished. I wasn't sure what else would be good, so I made a salad and some bread to go with it. I know Micron said and Brink prefer whiskey. Would you suggest anything else?" she asked politely, brushing her hair from her face. She then let out a breath. "General, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to invite a friend, Master Zan Canadius. He works with Jedi intelligence. I met him during my recent mission to Randilli." She flushed then, her stomach flip-flopping nervously. She chewed her lip for a moment. "He's Mandalorian, so don't be surprised if he shows up in his Beskar gem." She grinned slightly, remembering how she'd gotten the shock of her life when she'd first met him. She then fingered her comlink for a moment, awaiting Ari's answer. She hadn't told Zan of her experiences on Korriban, but he might know, being a master. Her cheeks flushed again as she remembered. Ari shot the younger woman a quizzical look. "You already run this by Micron?" Callista nodded and suppressed a giggle. "He said to ask you." "Oh, that." Ari sighed. "Does he think that just because he's back from the dead he can pull the go ask your mother routine? Of course, your friend is more than welcome to join us. Having someone from the intelligence division here could prove useful anyway." Stefan was the first to arrive with Andrea in tow. Micron was surprised to see the young lady following behind the Jedi Master. "Of course," Stefan said as he saw the look. "Introductions first. Mick, this is my daughter, Andrea Card. Andrea, this is Micron Din." "Din?" she asked as she looked him over, more questions forming. "Daddy, you didn't tell me." Mick laughed at the scenario. "I wouldn't have thought that you would have kept who she was meeting from her." "You have to expect surprises," Stefan told him and Andrea. "Don't worry, Angel. Something like this, I shouldn't have tested you that way." "Yes," Mick told her. "Yes, I'm Ari's husband from so long ago." Stefan couldn't help but crack a smile and then sniffed the air. "Well, I can see that we arrived close to time," he said to everyone. "I guess we need to start getting acquainted." "Long story, kiddo," Mick said to Andrea. "I've got some ideas and I'll explain once everyone is here." "What's that?" The voice came from the couch in the living room behind Mick. The rogue looked over his shoulder at a disheveled Brink. The old smuggler tossed off the blanket, looked around, sniffed the air, and smiled. "Good," he said. "I haven't missed anything important." Micron chuckled and motioned for Stefan and Andrea to come into the apartment. "Nope," Mick called to Brink. "You're just in time to help me put the extenders in the dining room table." "Bleh," Brink said as he slowly got up. "I knew I woke up too soon." Mick and Brink set to the task of setting up the dining table, while Stefan and Andrea visited with Ari and Callista in the kitchen. Einar showed up soon after the cards. He eyed Mick with suspicion before joining the others in the kitchen. Next to arrive was a man Mick had yet to meet. The door chime rang, and Micron answered to find a tall man dressed in civilian clothing who looked particularly uncomfortable. "Career military?" Mick thought. "You must be Callista's friend Zan." Mick extended a hand to the stranger. He gripped it at the forearm, a warrior's greeting. There's something about this guy. "Zan Canadius," he said, releasing the grip. "Intelligence Division, Jedi Council." "Pleased to meet you," Mick said, stepping aside and allowing Zan to enter. Mick watched his walk, shoulders square, leading with his center, a lightness in his step but confidence in his gait. "Can't be. I thought they were nearly extinct." I'm gonna butcher this, so please forgive me. Kumurk Tizad Roten Trok Nyin Yuris Eden, Mick said, which translates as the Gauntlet of the Republic. Zan stopped in his tracks and turned to regard Mick with open curiosity. He folded his arms before finishing the old Mandalorian proverb. Da werda, Eden Tratu. You speak Mandoa. Who are you? Micron Din, the rogue replied with a grin. I've heard that name. Zan's eyes unfocused, and Mick could feel the man stretching out to him through the Force. A Mandalorian and a Jedi? He was a great warrior, but I'd heard he'd fallen long ago. New Kiradik, She Chab Ichazla, Mick replied. It translates as not gone, merely marching far away. He allowed the stranger to probe his surface feelings and thoughts, but locked down the rest. And we have an ad coming up, so I will read one more thing. Zan finished his probe and a smile tried to tug at his lips. It looked like an expression he struggled with often. His brow furrowed, but he simply said, "Sakoi, Microndin, I have a feeling this will be the most interesting dinner indeed." But I'm going to pause there. Oh, nope, actually, 5 minutes. My bad. I can't read. So we have an ad coming up in about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Buddy, you don't know the half of it. Micron grinned again and followed Zan into the dining area. Not long after Callista had put her comlink away, she heard Mick answer the door chime, and a familiar voice sounded in the entryway. He was here. She saw Ari give her a sideways look. The older woman obviously was picking up on Callista's emotions. Her stomach flip-flopped nervously before she risked a peek into the living room. Yep, he really is here. Biting down on her mental commentary, she leaned against the kitchen counter for a moment before she felt steady enough to enter the living room. Smoothing her robes, she entered the room. "Master Canadius, I'm glad you could make it." It took every ounce of control she had to keep her voice even. Why was she reacting this way? She hardly even knew him. Zan smiled widely at Callista, not really caring how it seemed to the others. Calica, good to see you as well. Thank you for inviting me. Though I must confess, I feel like I'm standing out like a sore thumb, he said. Mandalorians were known to be blunt even about themselves. Rather than stay silent about feeling uncomfortable, he'd rather be open about it and be done with it. She blushed slightly. "I suppose introductions are in order, then. You've met Master Din already." Her lips quirked as she saw Mick twitch. She then gestured to Stefan and Andrea. "This is Master Stefan Card. He's a saber instructor here at the temple. Next to him is his daughter, Andrea, and Master Einar Ageron." She moved around the room, this time to Brink. Commander Brink Cadre. He, too, seemed to twitch, but Callista ignored it for the moment. And last but not least, General Ari Luxert Thron Din, head of the New Republic military. She trailed off then, slightly flustered by Zan's attention. With a glance to Ari, she asked, if you'll excuse me, General?" At Ari's nod, she gestured Jan into the kitchen, letting out the breath she'd been holding as the door slid shut behind them. "Well now, I take it there's something you want to ask of me? It's not often I get called by another member of the Order," Zan asked, trying to be as polite as he could. Something was definitely up with Callista. She seemed flushed and off guard. She stopped and took a breath. "I'm sorry for that. I guess I'm not used to this kind of thing." She sighed. A moment of silence passed before she spoke again. "I invited you because you are my friend, and I feel there might be more." She stopped there and flushed crimson, wondering if it was merely a case of hero worship. Zan scowled a bit, but not in anger, but in thought. "More?" he asked. Oops. And stood there quietly for a few seconds before the truth hit. "Oh." Callista blushed crimson again and turned away slightly. I'm sorry, that was very forward of me." Her voice was quieter now. Ever since she'd first met him, she'd felt something. Would he think any less of her if he knew what had happened not so long ago? Zan smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. "Naish, actually, I prefer if you were being forward. It saves the trouble. And for me, being a Mandalorian and a Jedi, feeling and hearing things that don't fit well with each other is highly annoying." He sent her soothing emotions through the Force to ease her mind. "But there is a lot we still don't know about each other. I think we should take the time to discover these things, slowly. That way no feelings are needlessly bruised." Callista nodded quietly, reaching up to wrap her fingers around his hand. "I've just felt so out of sorts lately, and Rendili." She broke off, not sure if she was ready to talk about Korriban yet. It was still fresh. Zan continued to send the soothing signals. "Such is the life of the Jedi, and sadly it seems more than ever in the last few years, stability in the galaxy is nearly non-existent. We're going to have to get used to being this active." And I'm going to pause there because the ad is starting in 10 seconds. So, now I'm going to pay attention to the chat. So, yay! We have an incoming Celia. That's awesome. So, going to take a minute and look at everybody that's in chat. So I see Poetic Side, I see Harpax, I see Demon, Madison, and several people that I don't recognize, but welcome in. I appreciate you being here. And I'm going to... Yes. So I'm going to chat a little bit while I wait for the ad break to go. I didn't snooze it. Oh, there we go. It was taking a second to pop up. Yeah, so we have about a minute and 20 seconds before the ad break goes. I'm so glad that I got that set up so that it would announce it in chat. So for those of you who are not subscribed, I try to not read during the ad breaks to help you out a little bit. So, trying to be aware of that. So, but we can use the ad breaks to ask questions, play with the chat cat, or have some general silliness. I do have some chat commands down in the panels below my stream if you want to play around a little bit. So for those of you who are new, if I use a word that is not familiar to you, it's generally going to be Mandoa, which is the Mandalorian language created by Karen Travis. You can use the translate command to ask me to translate that if I don't translate it in text. And you can also use the story fact command to ask me a story about, ask me a question about the story we're currently reading. So, alright. That is not a command! Demon, that is not a command. Celia! Welcome in. Welcome in. Good to see you. Yes, all kinds of people in here. I'm glad to see everybody this evening. Alright. Yes. Celia, you will have to tell me all about your trip when you get a chance. But thank you for joining. I appreciate it. And again, thank you to everybody who has joined me this evening. And now that we're out of an ad break, I'm going to continue reading. I just had to find my spot again. Sorry. Yes, tell me all about it later. Callista nodded. Hesitant at first, she moved to lean her head against his shoulder. It's not just that. I've done some stupid things. Her voice went even quieter as her thoughts turned to Korriban. She squeezed her eyes shut against the memories. Zan felt her mind shift into a dark place, and she was fighting against whatever she was seeing. Perhaps you should explain what you mean, Callista. The first step to overcoming something is acceptance. She stiffened slightly. She then hiccuped nervously. When my master was killed, I tracked his killer to Korriban. Her voice failed her then, and she just stood there, her face buried in his shoulder as she inhaled the faint sense of starship fuel. Zan sensed the raw hurt, the sense of abandonment she didn't quite acknowledge to herself. Go on. Let's hear it all. Master Faulkner was the only family I'd ever known. I was forced to watch him die right in front of me. She stopped for a moment and wiped at her eyes. I was captured, tortured. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. I went on my own without backup. Master Algernon came after me, and he fought the Sith Lord. He's different now. Zan scowled again. You mean he's fallen? He asked, trying to make sense of the puzzle. I don't know, but he's different now than he was. I feel like it's my fault that all of this happened. Now that was a remark that Zan didn't like hearing, so he pressed her for an answer. How so? Her head dropped, and she refused to look at him. What I did was stupid, reckless. Master Algernon is how he is now because of what happened when he came to rescue me. Whether Master Algernon has fallen or not, his current condition is his own choice, Callista. It is his own battle, not your burden. You didn't bring this on him. You may have been rash and impetuous, but you didn't force him to fall. Still, she looked away, ashamed. Her actions had put so many people in danger. Your actions may have been reckless, but a Jedi learns from their mistakes and does not hold on to lingering emotions from the past. You need to accept and let go, Callista. She chewed her lip for a moment and thought. You're right, she said after a few beats of silence. She wiped self-consciously at her eyes and took several slow breaths. I doubt Master Faulkner would have wanted you to hold on to this either, he said, smiling a bit more. A slow chuckle escaped her and she sniffled slightly. You're right. He'd probably be telling me the same thing, too. She took more slow breaths, feeling her shoulders loosen slightly as she did so. Zan nodded. That's how insidious the dark side is, Callista. Grief and regret are tools for the Sith to mold and twist lives. Just be aware of that. She nodded and flushed slightly, feeling as if she were once again a Padawan. I suppose we should go see what's going on. Zan grinned a bit mischievously. Not so fast. He sat down on the kitchen counter. You should tell me how you developed these thoughts. Callista's mouth fell open in surprise. She fidgeted nervously with the hem of her sleeve. After a moment, she leaned back against the counter beside him, turning to face him slightly. I won't lie when I tell you that I was scared to death the first time I saw you. But you were kind to me, even though you didn't know me. Zan smiled. Well, the scaring you to death part I'm used to. Mandalorians have a saying. Ki nu jirkad sha mandoad bertia, which roughly translates as don't mess with Mando's mate. And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, so I apologize in advance. And for the intel field, the Beskar Gem comes in handy. He grinned. But also, Mandalorians have a code of honor. You never give sloppy treatment to a friend. Since I'm a Jedi, that includes the whole order. He paused and smiled fondly. But you were different from that. She looked at him quizzically. How do you mean? You reacted to me as a Mandalorian would against any enemy, bravely. Prepared to take action if needed, with honor and respect to those bystanders caught in the midst of a battle. Her lips quirked. I was just doing my job. There's more, isn't there? She asked after a moment. Well, the fact that you argued with me shows toughness. This is a characteristic that most Jedi overlook, but for the Mandalorians it is a desired trait. Toughness of spirit more than anything else. Callista gave him a long, searching look. But I'm not Mandalorian, she told him with a gentle smile as she reached over to pour herself a glass of water. Not everyone that's Mandoad is born into the culture, Callista. Jedi training is not the only training and initiation out there. Mandos have another saying, Elit Rashia Taldin, family is more than bloodlines, meaning that we adopt others if they wish to be Mandoad and show the right qualities to be one. You have those, you know. She flushed again, for probably the 10th time that night. You mean that? Her voice was slightly odd, and she took a slow sip of the water as she tried to gather her thoughts. Mandos don't believe in lying or holding back the truth, Callista. I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. I don't know what to say, she admitted after a moment of silence. She certainly hadn't expected anything like that. Zan laughed. Well, if you do, don't hold back. Callista smiled, draining her glass before she set it down. You said people can be adopted into this way of life? Sort of like we are as Jedi? She really was trying to understand. Alec, Calica, using the intimate name contraction that he had started giving her. And like the Jedi, there are codes we follow. 99% of them match up to the Jedi mindset as well. She tilted her head at him, getting the gist of what he'd said. That's the second time you've called me that. What does it mean? She moved closer until they were a mere arm's length away, as she hopped up to sit on the counter beside him, her feet dangling above the tile. Zan chuckled again. In Mandoa, the suffix ika, added onto the first bit of a person's name, usually the first 3 letters if the third is a consonant, means little so-and-so. It is an intimate term for friends and comrades, so Calica is little Callista. She smiled. I like that. It fits. Letting out a breath, she found herself leaning on his shoulder again. The Mandowood culture sounds intriguing, she said. She said the word carefully, trying to pronounce it correctly. Zan chuckled. Mandawade. Plurals usually have an E at the end. Mandawad is just singular. Oh, she giggled and ducked her head slightly. I'm sorry. Zan laughed. Well, you'll learn. That is if you want to. I'd like that, she said quietly. It seems like the two fit well, if you're any indication. She joked gently, elbowing him in the ribs. Zan flinched, not used to being out of his armor yet. That was reserved for more private moments or on Mandam. I'll do my best. It's hard trying to reconcile our two groups, though, at times, even still. I guess it's one of those things you have to approach with an open mind, much like Jedi training. She smiled again and dropped her elbow, sensing the contact made him uncomfortable in some way. Then she glanced at the chrono over the stove. I think we'd better get back out there. They're probably wondering. This time her eyes seemed to be laughing as she looked up at him. Zan held her back 1 second more. So, you should know, those feelings you have? They're reciprocated, he said, somewhat awkwardly. Her stomach flip-flopped again. They are, she said, in a tone of slight realization as she carefully reached out to him in the Force, his fingers gently touching her arm. Zan smiled. Come on, let's get this over with. I kind of feel naked right now. She grinned lopsidedly. You do? I'm studying under the General herself. Talk about no pressure, huh? She replied, trying to lighten the situation just before they stepped back out into the living room. Or the dining room, I should say. They were all seated around the dining room table. Mick was at the head of the table with Ari to his right, then Maxwell, Einar, Stefan, Andrea, Brink, and then Zan and Callista. I wish Turlon were here, Ari thought to herself. Poor kid is off training and doesn't even know that his grandfather is alive and here on Coruscant. Then again, maybe it's best that those two meet somewhere quiet. So, Master Din, Stefan said as he dished himself some of the delicious-smelling soup Callista had made. Ari and Mick both turned to look at him and he stifled a laugh. Sorry, he smiled. I mean, Master Mikron. I'm sure you have many questions, but perhaps you would be so kind as to share your story first? If we know what you know, our answers to your questions will be more informed. Mick sipped at some of the soup and nodded. He seemed to take some time gathering his thoughts. You going to be okay, love? Ari gave his hand a squeeze under the table. Sure thing, Princess, Mick sent back. Thanks, though. Well, I guess I should start with the Vong, Mikron began. My squadron, the Silver Blades, was assigned to escort a convoy through Vong space, and hey, Ari, did they make it back? Ari nodded. Yes, love. Duo and 3 others made it back to Coruscant. That's how we found out about you. Duo led the expedition to go back and get you immediately upon reaching Coruscant. By the time we got there, though, there was just nothing left. Reliving that particular memory nearly brought Ari to tears, but she could feel Mikron's reassurance through the Force, and he smiled at her. It's okay, Ari, he sent. I know you tried. Good, he said aloud. Duo was a good man. Anyway, we were ambushed. Long story short, I got tagged pretty bad, and had to crash land in what I could only guess was the hangar on one of the Von Cruiser analogs. I fought my way to the bridge, thinking that I could maybe fly the thing out of there. But when I killed the commander, the ship started to, well, die. It was some kind of self-destruct sequence. I didn't have a lot of time, and there were no escape pods. I carved myself a little cubby in one of the walls and hoped that it would heal itself around me before the ship broke apart. Smart thinking that, Brink said around a mouthful of bread. Mick threw the smuggler a wink. Now, this next part is largely speculation because I don't really have any clear memory of what happened. It also requires a bit of explanation. My master, Erb Watam Vrelas, was something of a maverick in the eyes of the old Jedi Council. He had studied things that many of them found to be questionable. This knowledge he passed on to me through my training. One such technique is something like the outcome of combining a Jedi healing trance with a hibernation technique. This advanced state of stasis allows the Jedi to stay asleep far longer than normal, years, decades even. The healing process of the technique keeps the Jedi alive and slows the aging process. Outside myself and Arya, I'm not sure anyone knows about this particular trick. Stefan shook his head slightly. I've heard of it, but it's not something that most Jedi know about. It sounds unnatural, Einar said quietly. Perspective, Mikron shrugged. Well, in that fight with the Vaughn commander, I had fallen deeper into the Force than ever before. I think, as a sort of knee-jerk survival instinct, I threw myself into this Jedi stasis. But I never set a wake point. It's a very important part of the whole technique, as a Jedi who didn't know what he was doing could potentially never wake up. So, I think that's what I did. I think I entered the stasis without a wake-up point. The ship blew, and my little chunk of coral floated away through space with me entombed within. This next part gets a little weird. Because the previous portions have been completely run-of-the-mill? Stefan arched an eyebrow, and Mikron just laughed. Touché. The rogue nodded before plunging on. Somehow, my chunk of rock landed near what I think was Outbound Flight's final resting place. Something pulled me out of the wreckage and moved me into the medical facility. That's when I woke up. I found a Jedi starfighter, did a quick pre-flight, and burned space. If you didn't set a wake-up point, Einar asked, how did you wake up? Unlike every other time I'd entered stasis, Mikron answered, this time I had dreams. But these dreams were as real to me as though they'd actually happened. I dreamt of you, constantly, Ari. I had a vague idea of what was happening, but I never could break through the fog of that dream prison. I fought, and I fought, and I fought. It was torture. I relived my life in its entirety again and again, but it was always with a strange kind of detachment. I could see you, and I couldn't touch you. You were right there, and you couldn't hear me. I screamed and thrashed and tore at the fog around my head, but I just couldn't break free. Something changed, though. There was a shift in the fog, and it wasn't as thick in one particular spot. I saw you again, Ari, through the fog, and I pushed. I fought harder than I knew I could, and the clouds finally rolled away. The R2 unit with the starfighter had kept updating its star charts over the years and had a plot for Coruscant preset and ready to go. There was nobody there when I woke up. Mikron decided against telling them about his long conversation with a dead Jedi Master. The story in itself was crazy enough. I have no idea how I ended up in that medical facility, or where the people that pulled me out could have gone. I just knew, somehow, that you needed me. So, here I am. Truth be told, the rogue looked sad. I think I was dying. Something kept pulling me toward something. But then I would see you again, Ari, and I'd fight it off. In a sense, you're the only reason I'm alive, Princess. The rogue's dark eyes locked with hers, and she could feel his love like a tangible thing. It enveloped her and caressed her, and she could feel her cheeks flush. All those years he'd never stopped searching for her. All those years he'd been out there fighting to get back to her. And I just accepted it. I just accepted that he was dead and moved on. I should never have given up the search. I should have looked harder and searched all of space for me. Micron interrupted her thoughts. Ari, you did everything you could. You were alive. I'm glad you were able to live without me. It just means you're strong. It's one of the things I always loved about you. Yeah, I want to protect you, but I also know that you can take care of yourself. You're a fighter, like me. You two are doing it again, Brink said in a mocking sing-song voice. Doing what, Nerf Brains? Mick asked. You're going all quiet-like, which means you're talking to each other in your heads. You think you're all sneaky, but, well, if you had this many tells when you were playing cards, I'd be rich. Ari laughed, and Micron just smirked. The rogue took on a contemplative look and stared at Brink. He then made motions in the air, as though he was talking with a smuggler. Brink struggled to hear at first, and then flushed when he realized that Mick was making fun of him. He recovered quickly, though, by feigning shock. Mick! He exclaimed. Such talk! And at the dinner table, I'm appalled. Mick said, touché, and nodded to his friend. Master Din, Callista said before hurriedly adding, Micron, I've been doing some research on the Aang art of flow walking. Have you ever heard of it? I have a general idea. With your permission, I think it may be something to look into, the young Jedi continued. Under the supervision and guidance of a master or masters, we could more fully explore the events regarding your death and return. Perhaps we could even answer some questions that you may have. Give me some time to think about that, kid. Mick seemed more than a little hesitant, and Ari wondered about that. Hiding something? Einar spoke up again. Ari sensed Mick's flash of irritation, but he reined it in. How would you like me to delve into your mind, into your past, and relive events that you may wish to forget? The rogue said, and Ari could sense the force being drawn through him. How would you like it if, say, we flow walked with you to Korriban? Einar stood abruptly from the table, his hands clenched tightly. You... Not very pleasant, is it? Mick cut him off, still seated, but Ari could sense his readiness should Einar decide to attack. Micron, she sent him. But the rogue plunged on. Having a stranger delve into your mind and share such an intimate connection, he said, is violating. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to try to think before casting judgment, and this will be the only time that I ask. Einar looked as though he was struggling with his words. Ari wasn't sure what to think. She cared for Einar without a doubt. She loved Micron. Mick did have the slightly higher ground. Einar had been throwing little jabs at the rogue. But then again, this is still my house, and I will not have a brawl over dinner. Einar, sit down, Ari commanded. He paused for a heartbeat, met her gaze, and then sat down. She didn't even have to look at Mick to know a smirk was tugging at his lips. Micron, darling, I understand, but you won't be thrashing anyone over dinner, so don't gloat. Einar is a friend. I trust you both. And if either of you has any respect for me, you'll stop this posturing and at least be civil to each other. The two men eyed each other for a long moment. Ari could tell they were waiting for the other to crack first, and she feared that nothing she had just said had gotten through. Then, to her utmost surprise, Micron shook his head, sighed, stood up, and extended a hand to Einar. You are not my enemy, the rogue said. Nor are you mine, Einar replied cautiously. He took the rogue's hand, shook it, and both men sat down. Thank you, rogue. No, sweetie. Mick's voice was slightly subdued within her head. You're right. I do get a bit hot-tempered sometimes, and Einar is not my enemy. Stefan cleared his throat. Well, Master Din, he said, you've answered our questions to the best of your ability. It's only fair that we now try to answer yours. I've sensed something, Master Card, Micron replied. I can go to the library to learn the major events that have transpired since I've been away. My concern right now is this malevolence, this lurking power. So tell me, what's going on now, and who or what is behind it? We catch up on chat real quick. Hi, Nar. I see you. Are you sure? Wait, are you sure? Might just be a figment of my imagination then. Okay. Well. Oh gosh, I totally just now saw the hydrate. That was 20 minutes ago. Thank you, Nara. Oh, it's a stream elements command. I did also put the I put the request box down actually in OBS, so I just wasn't looking down there to look at it. Oh. I might have to talk to you about that later, because I don't know. I was not aware that was a thing. Yeah, I haven't really messed with the embedded alerts. I might look at that later. So, I'm also really not, well, I have my stream up on the other screen, but it's all muted. Or at least the tab is muted. Alright. So I know that I said that we were gonna get to chapter 9 tonight. I'm gonna try, but, it did take, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes when we first started stream to just chat. So, yeah, I'm still learning where it all is and what it all does. I've seen it a couple of times, but I didn't really mess with it because I have alerts through Stream Elements. But I did pull the points request down into my OBS actually, so I should see it. But I wasn't looking at that, so. Alright. Alright. Chapter 8. Also, if I'm reading too fast, please let me know. I'm trying to not speed through this, but I'm also trying to make sure that you guys can understand me. Alright. Chapter 8. Stefan nodded softly, having his own thoughts about the scene that had just played out. Einar's behavior wasn't like him, and it worried Stefan. I'll have to deal with this later. He leaned forward after he moved his dishware out of the way, forming his thoughts. How much do you remember about the Sith? Just the mention of the name caused a change in the mood. Last I had thought, Mick began to say, was that Vader and Palpatine were the last. I wish that were so, Stefan said after a few moments to think. Over the years, we've had to deal with an increasing number of them. More of them? Stefan nodded and continued. As Ari hinted earlier, there is one in particular that we have run into before that has tested us on more than anything else. Bane, Ari finished. Testing us is quite the way to put it, Stefan. I wouldn't have thought our last encounter was a test. I feel he's building to something greater, Stefan said. It would explain why they no longer follow the rule of two. Excuse me, Callista interrupted, Zan also looking inquisitive. The rule of two? Through history, Andrea said, taking this part after a nod from her father, the Sith had always followed what they called the rule of two. Only two Sith. A master and an apprentice, Mick finished. Yes, Andrea continued, Daddy and I have been looking at this for a while, and we think Bane might be starting to follow a rule of one. Several Sith warriors, adepts, and others, Stefan said, with one lord calling the shots. So how does this play into the whole situation now? Mick asked him. With the increasing tensions between the Bothans and more of the other groups of the New Republic, I'm seeing that this is starting to become what Master Windu called a shatter point, Stefan explained as he looked to everyone around the table. Bane is probably seeing this as well, possibly even aggravating it further. I can only think that he's using this to create chaos and draw us out into a confrontation. Sorry? Yeah, I'm trying to pay more attention to those ad notices. I apologize. So. Okay, got about 20 seconds. There we go. Callista froze for a moment when Einar's voice changed. She could feel the change in the room as the others could. Her gaze slid to Ari. As Callista moved to push her chair back, Ari shook her head. No, stay put. Callista relaxed, trying to drain the tension from her shoulders. Einar really had changed. She only fully relaxed when Mick and Einar shook hands across the table. She let out the breath she'd been holding and turned to Zan, feeling his gaze. Zan also wondered why this Einar was so upset with Mick, but since he didn't know any of them well enough other than Callista, he didn't comment. Still, the anger from this Einar worried him, and a glance at Callista showed she was also concerned. Perhaps we should discuss other things at this time? Callista nodded, looking relieved as the conversation turned to other matters. Not that it was much of a difference. Things with the Sith had always been tense, and that was putting it mildly. She had yet to tangle with them on a large scale as the others had. She listened to Stefan and Andrea relate what they knew before she spoke, glancing at Zan during a lull. Master Canadius, you're an intelligence. Do you have anything you could share with us that might help? Zan nodded sadly. Well, Master Card is correct in his assessment of Sith motives. We're facing a newer incarnation of their order. They call themselves the One Sith now. One purpose, one dedication, and one goal. Bane is only the top of the food chain there. It's the untold numbers of his followers that is the real threat. Callista sobered slightly, and she could see Stefan nodding off to her right. Ari and Mick watched with interest, still trying to get a feel for Zan, if their sense in the Force was any indication. That's a fair assessment, I think, Callista ventured quietly after a moment. She knew what was necessary, but given recent events she'd rather discuss other things. But for now, they needed to focus. She nodded, offering him a slight smile. Thank you. She looked down at her hands a moment before leaning closer to Zan. I'm sorry about earlier. It's hard to talk about there without getting worked up, she said, referring to Korriban as she spoke softly. Zan smiled slightly. It's perfectly understandable, Callista. That is the problem, though. Korriban has always been strong with the dark side of the Force, and now the remnants of the Vong War and the bitter feelings many galactic citizens still have about the Jatizi are playing into the One Sith's hands. You are lucky you were surrounded by those that are concerned for you. If the One Sith had captured you in Korriban with those feelings still intact, you would have made an easy recruit. She swallowed and nodded, falling silent for a moment. I wasn't in my right mind then, either, she admitted after a moment. I wanted justice for my master's death, and to get it I walked right into the Viper's Nest. Zan nodded. That's what the One Sith is taking advantage of now, though. Many Jedi these days carry these types of residual feelings from the wars, loss, bitterness, a perverted sense of justice. These are helping Bane recruit, and the One Sith's numbers are larger than the Jedi Order thinks they are. He sighed and shifted nervously in his seat, still uncomfortable being out of his Beskar Gam. Intelligence has noted that we've been losing more than 40 Jedi each year to unexplained reasons, seemingly without a trace. That, however, is not the case. She frowned, toying with her napkin. She kept one ear on the conversation at the other end of the table, but looked at Zan. How do you mean? Most of these disappearing Jedi served in the wars and had disputes with the Order in one way or another shortly before their disappearance, but they simply didn't return after a mission. And haven't you noticed that the Sith numbers seem to get larger month after month? I haven't really been paying much attention to that, to be honest, she admitted after a moment, her cheeks flushing. She'd been buried in her studies. Both Stefan and Ari had insisted, given what they had been sensing in the Force. Well, check the records with the Order if you want to double-check the facts, but I've been in places to observe this, and it's happening, he said, and took a drink of water after he finished. Further down the table, Callista saw Stefan nod. He's right, Callista. Their numbers have been growing, and I've been sensing another confrontation building for some time. But the where and the when of it still remains to be seen. Stefan nodded his thanks to Zan and then turned his attention back to Ari and Mick, sensing that Callista wanted to continue her conversation with Zan. Zan looked at Callista and sensed her thoughts. Got something on your mind, Calica? He asked gently. Yeah, she ventured after a moment. I was wondering about the Mandalorians. Many have thought them to be, well, for lack of a better word, extinct. Zan laughed. Well, in some ways that holds true, but the reality is the Mandalorians are still around, just not wanting to get involved in galactic affairs. Too often my people were hired as mercenaries or chattel for the Sith to use. Now we forge our own destiny. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'd like to learn more about them. A smile touched her lips for a moment. He was unlike everything she'd heard about the Mandalorians in the past. Her first encounter had definitely proved that. Zan smiled. I'd be happy to share this with you. Just remember, though, to keep an open mind and remember that circumstances and cultures have things that make others nervous. Mandalorians, most of all. Her eyebrows furrowed. I do my best to keep an open mind. I mean, Criff, I'm learning healing techniques from the General herself. That's an eye-opener for certain. She let out a breath, looking at Zan in the eye. She still fell back into formality. It was familiar. Zan scowled. It's Zan, Calica. I'm not your master, therefore you can drop that Osik. It was a bit of Mando pride coming out in his words. Rule 1. If a Mandalorian gives you the respect to give you their first name, they expect it to be used. She blushed, ducking her head slightly before she met his gaze. Sorry, it's a habit, I guess. Mick Run is trying to break me of it also. It's hard to get used to, she admitted. Zan nodded, but still scowled, though more out of annoyance. We all make mistakes. However, just let me remind you of something. Hopefully this will carry over to others. If you slight a Mandalorian, they make sure you know about it. Treat those in the way you wish to be treated. That's another Mandalorian rule. I'll keep that in mind. She chewed her lip for a moment and thought, You keep referring to a code of honor. What is that? Is it similar to the Jedi Code or different? It's different from the Jedi Code. It's not conflicting for the most part. The Mando Code of Honor tells the Mandawade how to live their lives and conduct themselves in our culture and galactic society. The Code of Honor is as essential to a Mandawad as the Jedi Code is to us as Jedi, Zan explained. Callista nodded again. Everything she learned about Zan, the Mandalorians, made her want to learn more. At the back of her mind, she sensed Ari's faint amusement and happiness that Callista had found someone she could talk to about things, and perhaps more. Callista pushed her empty soup bowl away and sipped at the water before she turned back to Zan. Maybe you could teach me some of it later, Zan? She hedged, hoping she wasn't pushing too much. She must admit that the Mandalorian way of life and their codes intrigued her. Zan smiled. I'd enjoy that. Few people ask me to learn our ways. He was intrigued by her innate openness and compassion. They were the very core of her being, and they were beautiful to him. If he were not a Mandalorian, he would have blushed with all the others seeing his reaction. He didn't like being read like an open book, but he wouldn't back away from the challenge. Mandawade needed challenges to grow. This new arrival concerns me, Bane said as he looked up the transparistale at the snow falling hard on Renvar. He felt it in his meditation strongly enough that he called Amron and Itka, his best warriors, into his chambers. Your command, my lord? Itka asked, looking up at him from where he knelt. His skin was pale against the black robes except for the darkened tattoos that covered his face and body. It intimidated the others, giving his face the look of a skull. To him, any person in their way was an object for him to cut down. We must know about him, Amron suggested. He thought just like Itka. Under Bane's orders, he had nearly completed Falk's conversion and training from the Jedi Order to theirs. My lord, if he is as you say, he is a risk that must be dealt with before we can move. I have thought on that, Bane said as he turned to his two most trusted warriors. Send some of our better warriors to Coruscant. I must know what this new arrival is capable of. Wow, Mick said as Stefan finished updating him on the situation. It was a lot to take in. That's about the lay of it, Stefan said as he leaned back in his chair, sipping some of the caf that was served after dinner. And Zan is correct as well. I confided in him to run that rumor down, and we confirmed it together. They are gathering more and more, and the problem is we need to figure out our next move, and the question is, where do we start? For that, Ari interjected, I think I may have some information we will all find enlightening. General, Maxwell said, the information is yet to be verified, and if it is, it will surely be highly classified. Can we justify sharing such sensitive intel with, well, civilians? I'm a commander, Mick interjected. Me too. Brink shot an indignant look at the colonel. My branch liaises with New Republic intelligence on all classified operations, Zan interjected. The Jedi Council will wish to be informed at some point, Card added. As head of the council, I see no reason to postpone matters. All well and good, Maxwell said, but still, enough! Ari cut Maxwell off with a look. I trust these people more than any others in the galaxy, Colonel, but to soothe your legal mind, I'll ask that everyone swear to silence until or unless this information is deemed unclassified. Not a word of what I'm about to show you will leave this room. Am I understood? Everyone nodded their silent agreement. Maxwell still looked uneasy, but even he conceded. Ari fetched a small holoprojector and connected the device to her datapad. She placed both on the table and slid the data card Talon had given her into the reader. Earlier this evening, I was given this data card by your relative, Stefan, she explained. The Katani grinned, and Mick's eyes widened slightly. Having worked with him in the past, I have no reason to doubt his word. However, the data analysts will want to run full forgery scans before this ever reaches the High Council. On this data card are star charts, holo recordings, and timestamps that place the Bothan and Zadi coalition in possession of something to the tune of 5,000 mobile suits. These military-grade suits utilize alloy that was supposed to remain a government secret. Their numbers are growing, and at this pace, it's safe to assume that they have a manufacturing facility somewhere. How do they manage this? Stefan shook his head in disbelief. The Bothans have always been excellent spies, Ari sighed. Their skill at subterfuge and espionage helped win the war for the rebellion. It seems, though, that their skill was a double-edged sword. She punched up a holographic recording and the image hovered in midair above the table. She tapped a key and the hologram began to play. This footage was taken by one of Talonkar's people running guns into Bothaway. He managed to slip by security at the starport and capture a transaction I think you'll all be interested in. The holo was grainy, but it didn't hamper the image. From behind a few packing crates, the view centered on a Bothan and a man in a deep black cloak talking amidst what was clearly half-assembled mobile suits. The Bothan seemed to be arguing something when the man in black ignited a crimson lightsaber and cut down the furred alien on the spot. He turned to another Bothan, barked an inaudible order on the amateur recording, and handed the Bothan a small sack of coins. The Bothan's fur ruffled in pleasure, and he hurriedly scurried off. The image jumbled as the impromptu spy made a hasty retreat. Spast, Einar spat. This seals it, then. Bane is funding the Bothan and Zadi military and has somehow managed to provide the plans and materials to build their fleet of mobile suits. Surely the Council will sanction action now? It's a tough question to answer, Maxwell shrugged. This data could be interpreted in many ways, and the Council will want to look at it from all possible angles. We must be certain without a doubt of our intentions and of the evidence. If we rush things and later learn that the Bothans were forced into the arrangement, then we run the risk of angering other New Republic worlds by unjustly punishing a victim of circumstance. That Bothan didn't look too upset to me, Mick said. And I trust Card. Talon, that is. No offense, Stefan, I'm just clarifying the person of whom I speak. None taken. Unfortunately, Colonel Maxwell is right. Ari sighed. This will take some time, but I wanted you all to be informed of the situation so you could have a clearer picture of what was happening. It seems to me that a little snooping of our own would not be remiss, Card said. The more solidifying intel we can produce, the better. Agreed, Ari said, though I can't yet send New Republic intelligence in without tipping my hand, and we can't be positive this isn't a trap. A lot has changed since I was last here, Mick sighed. It's a pity this hasn't. Ari arched an eyebrow at the rogue. Is that regret I hear, dear husband? I would have thought you'd relish the chance for some action. Oh, don't get me wrong. Mick raised his hands. I'm all for a good workout, but the Sith, they're so unchanging. They build their sources, attain power, and then try to blanket the galaxy in darkness. For once, I'd like to see them do something outside their etched in Durasteel parameters. Be careful what you wish for, Stefan warned. I can assure you that Bane is not your atypical Sith. He's cunning, cruel, and vicious, and proved to be a brilliant strategist. So we won't be bored, then, Mick winked at the Jedi Master. Corellians, Einar sighed. We're losing sight of the target, Ari interrupted. We need to think about this long and hard. We'll come back with an idea in a few days. In the meantime, I'll get this data to the crunchers and see about putting together plans the Council can't shoot down immediately. Agreed, Stefan nodded. On a completely unrelated note, the Council is ready to put Turlon through these knighthood trials. Though we are looking for potential testers, Einar has volunteered to test the boy's control of the Force, and as his master, I believe that is his right. Ari, would you like to test your grandson's knowledge? I'm no longer a member of the Jedi Council, Stefan, Ari said. Would they even allow such a thing? Ari, Stefan chided. That was never even a question. The only question the Council has is whether or not you'd accept. I do. I believe that I will also test his healing powers. After all, I taught him to harness the Force for healing. Good, Stefan smiled. That just leaves someone to test Turlon's skill with a lightsaber. I'd have thought of doing so myself, though I believe the perfect instructor for this particular section has recently surfaced. Megron looked to Ari. Fight my grandson? I'm pretty sure I'd actually like to meet him first. You will, Ari said. Tomorrow. I don't see a problem with it, Mick said, turning a predatory smile on Stefan, though I could really use a good warm-up, I think. Stefan eyed the rogue coolly. And do you think I could provide you an adequate challenge? Mikron laughed lightly. You're very good at hiding the fact you're very good, Master Card. There are some things, however, that give you away. I'll bet Zin knows what I'm talking about. No, I believe you'll provide more than an adequate challenge. I believe this could be enlightening for both of us. So, what do you say? Zin nodded in response to Mikron's statement about Stefan's saber skills. I've heard stories, but I've not been in his presence to see his skill with the blade firsthand. Stefan nodded and Callista hid a smile. Well then, you're missing out, Zan. Master Card is one of the best swordsmen I've met. Offering her a smile, Stefan turned back to Zan. Feel free to ask me what you like, Master Canadius, and I shall do my best to answer. He noticed that Callista had addressed Zan by his first name, but something in the way that Zan held himself told Stefan that Zan was wary. Well, I've learned a great deal about Caliga, Master Card, but I'm curious to learn how she ties in with you all. She didn't explain that to me, at least. Callista blushed and ducked her head. Sorry, Zan. She glanced at Stefan for a moment and saw Andrea hiding a smile. Stefan smiled briefly before he leaned forward to answer Zan's question. As I'm sure you've seen, Callista is a talented healer, but even healers must be able to defend themselves. He paused to sip his calf before he continued. When Callista came to the temple here on Coruscant, I began training her more extensively in the use of the saber. She's quite skilled, if I may say so. I almost found that out firsthand, Zan laughed, but I've seen her healing skills at work. Zan still looked uncomfortable and kept glancing at Mikron. So you are the rogue, Meven. It's nice to know there are more less restrained people in the Order. This is partly why I spend the least time on Coruscant as possible. Too damn stuffy around here. Mick grinned and glanced briefly at Ari before he nodded. Aye, that I am. With a lot of sorts having been dead and all. He turned thoughtful for a moment. While some still hold to the old ways, many, like Master Card and myself, take a more open approach. He gazed at Zan momentarily as if searching him in the Force. You are Mandalorian? Yes? It wasn't so much a question as seeking confirmation of his suspicions. I don't think I've seen a Force-wielding Mandalorian in all my years. He turned a smile towards Callista for a moment. From what I know of Callista, she doesn't back down easily. That speaks highly of you, Master Canadius. Zan grinned. Well, she's earned my praise as well. He looked at Callista a second before continuing. But yes, I'm a Mandoad, one of the few these days that has felt accepted enough in Mandalorian society to openly profess that without fear of bringing up the ancient hatreds. There are a few of us now that most simply wish to remain on Mandayam, but Barda and Jessic changed how we Mandawaid view the Jatizi. Andrea spoke up then after glancing at her father. If you'll permit me, Master Canadius. At his nod, she continued. Barden was pivotal in affecting the Mandalorians' view of the Jedi. He gave up his title during the Clone Wars. I'm glad to have you among us, Master Canadius. It is an honor. Zan smiled. Well, I don't know if I'm that big of a deal. His eyes seemed to take on a faraway look for a second. But you definitely used the right word. Honor. Andrea smiled briefly. I know that many Mandalorians have, shall we say, less than favorable views of the Jedi. It's been so for many, many years. The fact that you are here as both a Mandalorian and a Jedi says a lot. Most Arteezy outsiders don't understand why that happened, though. And if they knew the story and the reasons behind, then more understanding would come. Needless to say, the old views are dying out now. But then Mandalorians have had more recent experience with the Jatizi during the war with the Vong. Andrea nodded. That they did. The Jedi offered their assistance to the Mandalorians when the Yuzhan invaded Mandalore. She was silent for a moment. They failed, and the Vong poisoned Mandalore. From recent reports, they are still recovering. Zan nodded. Mandalorians and their farming culture, while less significant in these times than during the Mandalorian Wars, are still important to our identity as a culture. It's still taking time to clear up the pollution. Andrea nodded. Perhaps, if they are willing, the Jedi could offer their assistance. That is, if the council approves. She glanced at her father. I think that would be up to the Mandalorian leader, Andrea. She nodded after a moment. Zan nodded as well. Mandalore is slightly more preoccupied with rebuilding the Mandalorian fleet. He caught a frown on Maxwell's face and laughed. Don't worry, Colonel. The Mandalorian Empire will want to take... Hold on. I doubt the Mandalorian Empire will want to take on the New Republic, Zan said under his breath. Wasted good resources, that. He then nodded. Callista ducked her head, hiding a grin, and she could see even Megan Brink grinning at that one. The only people who didn't seem amused were Einar and the Colonel himself. But then, Einar had been rather unlike himself of late. Zan couldn't resist digging into the Colonel one more time. Whoops. Give me one sec. I lost my spot. Give me a second. The only people who didn't seem amused were Einar and the Colonel himself, but then Einar had been rather unlike himself of late. Zan couldn't resist digging into the Colonel a bit more. Tell me, Colonel, since when did Jedi and the others gathered around this table become civilians? Maxwell started, and his gaze slid to Ari. She nodded, giving him reassurance to answer. Maxwell cleared his throat, nervously fiddling with his napkin. Well, Master Canadius, I'm just highly skeptical of sharing such sensitive information with those who are not direct members of the military. We've been victims of spies before. He trailed off, seeing the look Mick gave him. But I trust the General's judgment, he finished hastily. Zan laughed. Typical New Republic military. Some facts for you, Colonel. Something you should be aware of next time. The Senate ruling before Palpatine's revelation of his true self remains New Republic law. The law states that Jedi clearance is only secondary to the Chancellor or the head of state. So I suggest you stop playing desktop general and leave the name-calling to the Sith. Maxwell went quiet then and ignored Zan. Callista could sense the amusement of many of the others, and she too had a hard time hiding her smirk behind her napkin, but her eyes betrayed it. Ari sat up straight, her smile disappearing as she stared hard at Zan. I'm afraid you are mistaken on that one, friend. The Jedi Council does have a security clearance granted to them by my office, but also revoked at my leisure. Only the President can overrule my decision regarding warfare, but not the security of the New Republic, and the Senate is wrong. The Jedi Council's clearances come directly from me. And since when has this become a law? Zan asked, his eyebrows cocked. Since I watched the President sign the bill into law over 10 years ago, granting me that power, Ari grated. Zan looked at her with understanding. If you'll excuse me, I will fix a pot of calf. Ari rose from the table, still a little hot under the collar, at the hot shot sitting at her dinner table. Zan spoke up. Nisita, everyone. But I guess that's the first lesson for most of you. Mandalorians brook no slight and don't hold back their thoughts. Mick held up his hands, palms facing Zan. No complaints from me, buddy. I appreciate a man who talks straight. Brink nodded as well, and Callista sensed that even Stefan's respect for Zan had just gone up. Zan nodded. Jate. Next time, remind me to bring my Beskar gam. No offense, but I feel naked in front of you all right now. Mick just shook his head and grinned, saluting Zan with his glass of whiskey. I wouldn't blame you. This group can get a little rough, he told Zan with a wink. He knew precisely how Zan felt. Zan just shook his head and laughed. I suppose you all, besides the Colonel, have questions for me? I'm willing to answer some more. Einar spoke up then. Master Canadius, how long have you been working with Jedi intelligence? Since being found as the street kid living in the streets of Mos Eisley as a 6-year-old. My master found me, discovered my force sensitivity the hard way, took me into his household and raised me. Only the council knew the truth of his and my identities for a long time. Stefan nodded. Times were difficult then, and many Jedi had gone into hiding following the Force psychosis. Zan frowned. The Force psychosis was not the reason behind his or my identities being kept secret. It's a little difficult to explain to the Hutt Crime Syndicate how a major Hutt crime lord was an intelligence agent hoping to gather enough information to shut down the families. Ah, that makes sense, Stefan said, nodding as Einar did. Thank you, Master Canadius. Zan nodded and waited to see if other questions would be raised. Do you want a few days to loosen up and prepare? Stefan asked Mick offhanded as he looked over at the rogue. He saw Ari's eyebrow shoot up from the side, as if to say, you did not just say that. He could get a sense of a giggle almost coming out of his daughter and Callista, a curious look from Einar, but the look that Mick gave him was passive, almost unreadable. Tomorrow, he said as he leaned over the table, and you can't fool me with the humbleness you show. Humble or not, you're actually looking forward to this. If any of the Jedi at the table were betting people, Stefan felt that bets would be placed when he leaned forward to look at Mick. I sense a lot of... Whoops. I will stop there. I caught it that time. Hope everybody's enjoying so far. Alright. Yeah, I'm just gonna take in a little bit of a break, give my voice a rest. I hope everybody's enjoying. Alright. So this is... Oh. We may end up going a little bit long if we want to get through chapter 9. That was my goal, was to get through chapter 9, but we will see how far we get. And we're back. So as I was saying during the ad break, my intent was to get through chapter 9. We are almost done with chapter 8, and I may end up going a little bit long just to get through chapter 9. Well, we'll see. So, let's see. If any of the Jedi at the table were betting people, Stefan felt the bets would be placed when he leaned forward to look at Mick. I sense a lot of pride between us on this, Mick ronned in. Ari mentioned how you were with the blade and what I had read myself. Tomorrow it is. And the place? Private or public? Mick asked, smiling. I think maybe one of the sparring rooms, Einar started to suggest, already mentally wagering on Stefan. Or maybe here at the palace, Ari said, unsure who to wager on. How about the Chamber of 1,000 Fountains? Callista suggested, and all heads turned to her. Agreed, Mick and Stefan said simultaneously, almost causing a snicker from everyone else. Ari thought there might not be much of the chamber left. She was the only one in the room who had seen both her husband and Stefan fight. This was definitely going to be a spar she wouldn't miss for anything. Einar excused himself and stood up. He had a nagging feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint it. Since Korriban, his force sense had been all but numb, but he kept feeling this blanket of anger covering him and cutting him off from the force. He tried shutting his eyes as he stood by the window overlooking Coruscant and stretched out his feelings. Kevin. There was nothing. He opened his eyes and turned around, crossing his arms into his sleeves. He looked over the group of people before him, his gaze fixed on Mick, and he tried to sense something, anything. But all he could get was a feeling that their paths would cross soon, and it wouldn't be pleasant. He didn't like him, not one bit. Mick glanced up and matched his stare, his face blank and focused. like a call to arms. Okay. Chapter 9. Mick cast a frail grin at Stefan. I can't wait, the rogue said. Though, I suggest we all call it a night. I think we all could use some time to think, and I'd like to sleep in a real bed. The others nodded agreement and began their goodbyes. As everyone filed out, Callista and Zan lingered. Mick could sense their inquisitiveness and smiled. I'll be to bed shortly, Ari, he sent his wife. Just gonna have a smoke and get to know your apprentice and her friend. Be nice, rogue, Ari sent back. Always, he replied. Ari excused herself and then headed to the bedroom for the night. Mick poured himself a Warren's Reserve and nodded to Callista and Zan. I could use a bit of fresh air and company would not be remiss. Care to join me? Callista smiled and glanced at Zan. Sure, Mick. It was getting a bit stuffy anyway. She grinned at that, thinking back to Maxwell's reaction. She then ducked into the kitchen for a few glasses, passing Mick another whiskey, Zan his coffee, and poured herself a hot chocolate. She needed to figure out what Zan liked. I'll just be on the balcony, Mick said. The view is great out there. The rogue motioned for the two to follow as he slid open the transparent steel doors and lit a cigarette. He sat in one of the patio chairs and kicked up his feet on the balcony railing. Zan sat around, nervously pulling at the collar of his suit to make himself more comfortable, but he was failing. Thankfully, Mick's invitation broke him from his attempt. Sounds good. I need a bit of a fresh air anyway. He got up, still fidgeting, but walked to the balcony and laughed at Mick stretching out. That must be the traditional Corellian posture, stretched out like that. Callista snickered. I think you're right, Zan. She sat down in the other empty chair, cradling her cocoa mug. Zan, why don't you take off the jacket? She said quietly as she leaned over. I guess it's in the blood, Mick shrugged. Then again, I always felt that if you're uncomfortable, you're doing something wrong. He winked at the Mandalorian. Zan nodded as he took off his suit jacket and smiled. Comfortable for me is a bit different, though. You'd be surprised how comfortable my armor is. For me. Probably less than you'd think, Mick said. If I had my way, I'd wear a flight suit daily. They are hard to shrug off in a hurry, though. Callista took the jacket and draped it carefully over the back of her chair before she smiled. Even Jedi robes can be cumbersome in certain situations. Zan nodded. That's why I don't bother with robes. Besides, in this day and age, wearing robes is like a beacon. Hello, I'm a Jedi. Therefore, if you don't like Jedi, come attack me. Nah, I'll stick to my armor. A little intimidation in others isn't always a bad thing. Agreed, the rogue nodded. But I'm curious. Last I knew of the Mandawade, they were fighting their own personal war against the Vong. Making a comeback, are they? Zan sighed. Not exactly. A few years ago, Mandalore decided the best way to keep the Mandalorian Empire intact was to withdraw from galactic events as a whole. A few of us, like me, work in the open, but most stay within the Empire's borders. The Sith, though, are threatening that peace. Callista frowned slightly. How do you mean, Zan? Zan sighed and asked, do RTZ know how the Mandalorians actually got involved with the Sith in ancient times? Vaguely, Mick answered. They worked for them for a time, no? Zan shook his head. Not exactly. It began over a test of honor, a fight. Freedom Nad, the Sith that came upon the ancient Mandalorians, was considered a threat. However, Mandalorian honor demanded that if he could battle our Mandalore and win, he would be considered a warrior to be respected. When Nad defeated Mandalore the Ultimate, it signaled to us that there were stronger warriors than us in the galaxy, and to learn from them and add that knowledge to our own. Hold on. It signaled to us that there were stronger warriors than us in the galaxy, and to learn from them and to add that knowledge to our own, we had to work with the strongest warrior. In that case, it was Nad and the Sith. It makes a kind of sense, for sure. Mick extinguished his tobacco and sipped at his whiskey. Better the enemy you know. Zan sighed. Well, The complication comes with the code of honor that binds us Mandalorians. A Mandalorian's word is a bond and a contract that cannot be broken without losing their honor. Bane is trying to take advantage of that ancient past to enslave us once again to Sith control. Callista chewed thoughtfully at the inside of her cheek for a few moments, her gaze still on the city beyond the balcony. What is Mandalore doing to oppose this control? Zan sighed. Nothing open. Even if we get a fleet back into commission, it won't be able to hold off the number of ships the Sith can throw at us, and Mandalore isn't willing to ask the New Republic for help. What's the Mandalorian history with the New Republic? Meg asked. That pride could get your people into trouble. Oops. Actually, that was Callie asking that, I think. Sorry, that was not clear. That pride could get your people into trouble, you know, Mick warned. But who am I to talk? Callista hid a smile at Mick's last comment, but turned her gaze back to Zan as she sipped at her cocoa. The real question is, what are you going to do? Zan sighed. I've made my decision to fight the seat long ago. When I became my master's Padawan, I'll do nothing less than that, even if it means becoming Darmanda. But as for Mandalore himself, I can't decide for him. Mick arched an eyebrow at the Mandalorian. Never judge a Mandalorian by his best gargam. I can respect a man who sticks to his convictions. Callista blushed slightly at Mick's comment, again remembering how she'd met Zan. Zan smiled. Convictions are the measure of a man, or a warrior, not the battles they have been in. He frowned now, sensing what was to come, or will be in. Callista frowned. There it was again, that sense that the masters were sensing things she could not. She sighed softly in frustration and gulped her cocoa as if it were whiskey. Mick, how much do you know of the events on Korriban? She asked softly, surprising herself. Just that something happened to you on that rock, Mick said with a brave smile. You try to bury it, but you broadcast on a pretty open frequency, sweetheart. Callista swallowed and slowly met his gaze before looking away momentarily. I was stupid. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. You know what the biggest enemy of a Jedi is? Mick asked. Callista shook her head silently, gazing at him as her fingers unconsciously clenched around her mug. Themselves, the rogue continued. It was the downfall of Vader and countless others. They become self-fulfilling prophecies. They make one mistake and start doubting themselves. That leads to more mistakes and more self-doubt. You're a good kid, Callista. It doesn't take a genius to see that, but you're still only human. The Jedi have always held themselves on this pedestal of perfection. Ridding yourself of emotion isn't the answer. Robots weren't meant to wield this power. At the same time, though, the fact that you feel bad about it is a good sign. Just don't let it eat at you. You've made a mistake. Learn from it. Carry on. Dwelling on it can only hurt you in the long run. I know, she said, after staring out across the city. It's hard to forget it, though. She ran her fingers around the rim of her mug, making a soft sound. Finally, she voiced what had been eating at her. And seeing Master Alderaan didn't help. Oh, Mick said. So he's not always been a stiffed-back hard case? She actually flinched. He came after me before Master Card and Dylan. He fought the Dark Lord. When I saw him again, he was badly injured, burned over much of his body, and he felt wrong. She emphasized the word as she looked up at him again. I can't help but think if he hadn't come, he wouldn't have changed. See, and there's that Jedi guilt for you. Mick lit another cigarette. It's like the Jedi ingrained their own with this kill switch. You can't shoulder the weight of the whole galaxy on your shoulders. No one can. Aenor is his own man. His mistakes, his trials, they are his alone. You can't be there to help him. Oh, you can be there to help him and let him know he's got friends, but you can't take his burden away from him. In a way, that line of thinking is more selfish than selfless. I don't hold much stock in the Jedi way, if you haven't noticed. She chuckled. Actually, I did notice, and it intrigues me. It's refreshing. The Jedi way, that tired cliché, Zan chuckled. Micron shrugged easily. In the end, I believe you know what's right or wrong without some dogmatic praxium beating it into your brain pan. But I could always be wrong. It's happened before. She fidgeted for a moment. I feel a little stifled at the temple sometimes. I wish I could go somewhere else. Oh, don't let me dissuade you, Callista. Mick looked over at her. I haven't nearly got everything figured out. The point is, be true to yourself and criff the rest. You aren't, Mick. I've been seeing it for myself since I began training with Ari. She actually laughed. I like that. The rogue smiled at the mention of his wife, but remained quiet and thoughtful. She's interesting, that one. But then again, most of you are, save the Colonel, Zan commented. Micron laughed. Callista groaned. He's wound far too tight for my liking. Interesting. That's a nice way to put it. Callista snorted, hiding her mouth with her hand. But it fits. Listen, tomorrow is going to be nuts, Micron said. But I'd love to get to know you two better. Are either of you handy with a hydro spanner? Callista shrugged. Some, but I'm not the greatest. But I'm small, so maybe I could help? Zan laughed. The Pargila breaks down so often that I need an attachment in one of my gauntlets. Fantastic! The rogue grinned. Sometime soon I plan on getting to work on the Firebird. Poor girl's been sitting lonely for 45 years. I'll show you what a Corellian ship is made out of. I could always use a couple extra hands. Zan laughed again. Well, if they're anything like the people they produce, I'm sure it's going to be an adventure in and of itself. Just tell me when and where, Mick, and I'll be there, Callista answered. I could use a break from my studies. I like you guys. The rogue genuinely smiled at the two. For the first time since coming back, Mick actually felt utterly relaxed. Zan grinned. The feeling's mutual. I don't often get to socialize with others in my line of work unless I'm trying to get an in. A slow smile spread across her face. You're one of the first people besides Zan I felt I can actually talk to about things. Everyone else is so stuffed. She muttered the last word. We'll get along just fine, I think, Mick said, raising his glass in their direction. That being said, it's about time for me to hit the sack. I've got a wife I haven't seen in 45 years, a big fight tomorrow, a grandson to meet for the first time, and some overconfident Sith Lord to think about. Callista chuckled. Shall we leave you to it, then? Zan nodded. I think we should, Calica. Never get between a man and his wife, is a folk saying on Mandalore, and for good reason, he said, picking up a suit jacket. Micron saluted the Mando and winked at Callista. I'm sure you've got better things to do than listen to me go on about Jedi fallacies. Oh, my word, thank you. Thank you, Ivory. Welcome in. Welcome in, welcome in. Micron saluted the Mando and winked at Callista. I'm sure you've got better things to do than to listen to me go on about Jedi fallacies and the finer points of ship tuning. Oh, you're fine. Callista nodded. Indeed. She rose, cradling her cocoa mug momentarily before impulsively hugging him. Have a good night, Mick. The rogue was slightly startled at first, but returned the hug. You too, kid, he said. Zan? Zan smiled. Recherche chez me, rogue. Hope you managed to stay in one piece after tonight. Then he found Callista's elbow in his ribs. It was a joke, he laughed. She just grinned and shook her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Oh, I'm sure I'll manage. Mick assumed a feral grin. I just hope they get it on hollow. Callista groaned and made a dismissive gesture at him. Go spend time with your wife, please. Zan laughed again and waved at he and Callista made their way out. With dinner finally over, Callista and Zan had taken the time to slip out. She was curious, and she had difficulty denying the feeling she'd expressed to him in the kitchen a few hours ago. She'd caught Ari's knowing look, but just smiled. Once outside, Callista looked around the interior of the palace presidential level to get her bearings. Each apartment had been built like a small house. Now came the task of finding their way to the hangar. With a look at Zan, she chuckled. I always get lost in here. I think the hangar is that way. she said, after a moment, pointing to the left. Zan nodded and followed, grumbling at the size of the building. Wasteful, beautiful, decadent, and the Republic wonders why many other groups want nothing to do with them. Callista sighed. A lot of this is left over from the time of Palpatine, Zan. It is wasteful, yes, but at least the Republic is using the space. A simple building could be used for the presidential home, not this monstrosity. Mendawade considers stuff like this a lie, a grand exterior to hide within. No true sense of purpose, Callista shrugged. Many in the Republic still hold to the grand scale of the Republic of old. We have been through a lot, and this serves as a reminder of the ideal they strived for. She shrugged. If you think about it, even the Jedi Temple is extravagant, and we are a religious order. Zan shook his head. The temple also houses over 10,000 Jedi, plus numerous workers to help maintain it. The temple precincts, words are hard, and actually run it. The number is around 250,000, if I recall correctly. Therefore, its size is needed to house that many individuals. The presidential palace's official residency cap is 2,500. The building is twice the size of the Senate, and in the Old Republic, the Senate was the biggest building in the galaxy. You see my point now. Why keep something that has no purpose and detracts from the core values the Republic says it has? That's why it's wasteful. She shrugged. I'm just a healer, Zan. I don't know much about the political side of things. That's more the general's arena, or muster cards. Her tone was slightly apologetic. They made their way down the wide corridor to a lift. Zan frowned. You don't understand. I serve the Republic as a Jedi and agree with its core values. I'm also a Mandalorian. You said you wanted to know about my culture. Well, this is how I'm showing you, he said as he made his way into the lift beside her. Mandalorians see things in different ways than the citizens of the Republic or even the Jedi do. She frowned a moment. I just haven't given the political stuff much attention. Maybe I should. She made a face, though remembering the political maneuverings of some groups in the past. This isn't politics to a Mandalorian. It comes down to honor. Face value is important for a Mandalorian, and so is saying what you mean. These types of things make us nervous. A building, a false persona, a lie. All these things are contrary to how we operate in my culture. Callista considered that. It would make things more straightforward, yes. I get frustrated when people say one thing and mean another, but you, Zan, you aren't afraid to say what you mean. She looked up at him, her dark hair gleaming slightly in the overhead light. Zan smiled. That is the way of the Mandalorians. We consider such things a sign of honor. A lie, a false pledge, is a way to cause more problems than it solves. To us... Whoops. Ah! I did it again. Oh my word. I did it again. Hold on. I lost my spot. I must be hitting one of the buttons on my mouse. It must be a back button, so I keep hitting that on accident. Alright. Okay. So, hello and hi. Thank you for the lurk. To us, not only is it not straightforward, but it is a show of poor manners, to use an Aratize term, but a show of hostility, a greater violence to come. He continued. We are accused of poor manners in your culture, but in mine, your form of manners is, in truth, a disguise that you can hide behind. She could have taken offense, but she reminded herself again that he wasn't one to hide the truth, and he didn't mean her specifically. She looked down and thought, as if she were studying the carpet threads in the lift. It's because they're more concerned about what they want than for the greater good of their people. They will do whatever they can to achieve it, no matter the cost. Zan grinned. And now you begin to see. That is why we act as we do, not caring if we offend or disgust others. Our actions are our truth. What we believe we actually act on, not saying one thing and doing another. A Mandalorian would see the building as saying you are more concerned with showing power than compassion. It's why the Jedi Temple makes sense, but this building doesn't. Callista nodded momentarily, leaning against the lift wall as she felt it sliding to a halt. That made sense. She was silent for a moment before she continued. You said before that I'd acted as a Mandalorian would have. It's just how I am, she told him with a slow smile as she stood and stepped from the lift as it slid to a halt. Zan grinned, and that's actually how a Mandalorian acts. Oops. We got an ad coming up. They don't act in a way that is boastful or prideful. They act in a manner that is them. If some Mandalorian is a mere Ossic, or as you'd say in basic, a shit for head or shit for brains, then that one whoops. Okay, sorry. Grammar is hard today, apparently. They act in a manner that is them. If some Mando is a mere Ossic, or as you would say in basic, a shit for brains, then that is their personality. Okay. If another one is quiet and withdrawn, that's because they are quiet and withdrawn all the time, not just in the moments you may run across them. Nodding, Callista pointed the way towards the hangar. I like that. Not hiding behind pretenses, it's refreshing. She thought a moment. Did you bring a speeder, or will we need to borrow one? I've got a speeder here, though you might consider it garish in Arteezy terms, Zan said, grinning. He liked the fact that she was a quick study, and now that he knew where he was going, he led the way into the hangar. Once inside, he directed her towards a speeder done up like a Corellian hot rod. Honest opinions now, he said once she saw it. She grinned, following him into the hangar. As soon as she laid eyes on it, she started giggling. Sorry, I can't help it. I'm used to plain and simple, she gasped between giggles as she brushed her dark hair from her face. Zan laughed. It's too boring for me. But then I usually stick out like a sore thumb anyway, so I wanted to enjoy what I used. And she's fast enough to back it up, he said, easily jumping behind the controls. He grinned at her and gestured for her to do the same. Just jump in. You are with the only Jedi in the Order who won't care about freedom of expression. Laughing, Callista shook her head. She then planted a hand on the fuselage and vaulted quickly into the passenger seat. When she looked up again, she was smiling. That was fun. I've been kind of stuck into the temple for a while. She was quiet for a moment. After Korriban, the council restricted my movement for a while. I wasn't allowed to leave Catan for about 3 weeks after Master Card picked me up. She sighed. I know they had their reasons, but what would I have done? Zan scowled. Perhaps if you look at recent events and see what you were still feeling about Korriban, that will provide the answer, he said. He started the engines and gently guided the speeder out of the hangar and into Coruscant's traffic flow. Callista fell silent momentarily, contemplating that as she gazed across the city. She'd been reckless, more motivated by her grief than anything else. At that realization, her shoulders slumped slightly. Zan patted her on the shoulder with his free hand. Now. You are moving past it. There is no need to head back into that train of thought. Besides, you still have a lot of questions to ask. He smiled and then began picking up speed. He would have been considered borderline reckless if not for the ease he seemed to have with the controls. She offered him a somewhat shaky smile. Sorry. It's hard for me to put that to rest, I guess. Her voice was quiet. Letting out a breath, she felt her shoulders loosen again. It's just hard sometimes not having anyone to talk to about my teachers. I feel as if they're scrutinizing me. I hate that feeling, she admitted. It may be scrutinizing, but it's not because they think you will fail or anything of that nature. They're trying to find out how much of your potential is becoming actual practice. Trust me, it seems off-putting, but it's not meant to be. And someday you will be doing the same as to other hopefuls, you know. I know. It's just frustrating. She smiled slightly, looking over the city again as she spotted the familiar spires of the temple. Zan nodded. How long ago were you knighted, Calica? He asked, trying to find an answer for her. Callista opened her mouth to reply and closed it again as she thought about that. 4 or 5 months ago, she said finally. It's all kind of blurred around that time. She finished quietly, but still loud enough to be heard over the wind. Zan chuckled. Well, you are still in that space between being used to being a Padawan and now coming into your own. Give it time, Caliga. You can't be expected to be fully assured yet. Her lips twitched for a moment. I suppose you're right. I feel like I've let a lot of people down. She cut that thought off, knowing it led to a place she didn't want to go. Zan sighed. You made it back from the brink. You were not responsible for others' actions. Remember that. Zan pulled out of the traffic stream and headed for the Jedi Temple's hangar. So come on. You've got questions. I've got answers. She gave him a lopsided grin. Well, this code of honor you mentioned. I'm intrigued. She thought for a moment. Where did you want to continue our discussion once we're in the temple? Perhaps my quarters here, or yours, Zan said, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her at the moment. For the discussion, of course. Of course. Her voice went a little quiet. She had to laugh at herself. She was a grown woman, a knight even, and she still reacted to his attention as she would have as a teen. It was both amusing and slightly embarrassing. This code of honor seems to be pretty major for your people. Yeah. And we're in an ad, I'm sorry. Oh, man. I try to pay attention to those. And so good to see you. Hi. Yes. Yes, we are in an ad. I do apologize. So sorry. But it's so good to see everybody. Yeah, I'm trying to not read while we're in ads. So sorry. Okay. And we're back. Yay! Oh, give me just a second. Okay. This code of honor seems to be pretty major for your people, she ventured after a moment. As major as the Jedi Code is for us, or the Constitution of the Republic is for the Republic itself, it is the constitution of our empire and the moral basis and compass of our lives, he explained as he set the speeder down to land. It serves these two purposes in one document. Nodding, Callista climbed out of the speeder, her feet lightly touching the permacrete. And the armor? She asked with a slight grin, remembering the first time she'd seen it. It's part of it. It's the oldest part of the Code of Honor. That part is known as the Wrestle Nair, or the 6 actions. And those are? Her interest was piqued now. Could the Mandalorians as a civilization be as old as the Jedi themselves, she thought? Zan smiled. I'll say them first in Mandoa, then in Basic, so you have an idea. I'm gonna murder the pronunciation on this, so please bear with me. Oh, goodness. I'm gonna see if I can find it. 1 second. No. Oh, I will just try. I thought I had it written down somewhere on how to pronounce it, but apparently not. So, bear with me. Kajuri Beskargam, Kajorhai Mandoa, Kara Novo Alit, Kegarteli Alit Balir, Kabajuri Sa Mandoade, Ke Shakimi Har Mandalore. That means wear armor, speak Mandoa, defend the family, help the clan to succeed, raise your children to be Mandalorians, and rally to the cause of the Mandalore. It seems pretty straightforward, she told him with a smile. Even the Jedi Code can be interpreted in many ways, but those, not so much. Zan laughed and nodded as he jumped out of the speeder that was now parked. Not really, no. But these principles are over 20,000 years old, and they still make sense today. She momentarily looked at him, wondering if he'd sensed her earlier thought. Things that don't change but are still applicable. That sounds sort of like the Jedi Code, except that has changed over the years. Zan nodded. The Jedi Code hasn't essentially changed for thousands of years. Same with the Russell Nair. But a phrase comes to mind. Mido children recite it, which may shed some light on why we consider this important. Bajir, Beskargam, Aranav, Alit, Mandoa, Bal Mandalore, and Vinkoyan Mi, education, armor, self-defense, family, language, and our leader all help us survive. That does help some. It puts things in perspective, she mused, mouthing the words to herself for a moment as they walked out of the hangar and down the corridor to the nearest lift. As she walked beside him, she repeated the words to herself. They resonated with her, much as the Jedi Code had when she'd taken the oath of knighthood. But this was different. It felt more personal, like it was a piece of herself that she didn't know had been missing. And what does this put in perspective for you? Calica, Zan asked as he walked into the lift. Your floor or mine, by the way? That stopped her for a second. Mine, I guess. It's closer than the master's quarters, unless you'd prefer yours. She was silent for a moment. It feels like it adds that missing piece for me. Zan pressed the controls for the knight's residency and leaned back against the wall as he spoke up. You feel incomplete still? Interesting. Why so? I'm not sure. I feel like something is missing. Maybe it has something to do with recent events. I don't know. I have some combat and lightsaber training from Master Card, but he and my late master both felt that I should focus on the healing arts. I guess I feel a little unbalanced, skill-wise. Zan frowned a bit. I agree. It is important to be a healer, but the Jedi must maintain balance in all things. Perhaps I'll have to teach you some basics of the Mandalorian arts. A smile spread across her face at that prospect. I'd like that. I could use the training. It's been quite some time since my last lesson with Master Card. And being in the healer ward can get a little stuffy, she admitted. Zan chuckled, and the lift doors opened. What room number is your quarters? I'm going to run and get into my comfortable armor. 134. It's near the end of the hall. Her eyes widened and she smiled. Comfortable armor? Zan nodded and repeated the number 134. And yes, our Arteezy speak of comfortable clothes. Mandalorians have them, but it's awkward to explain why we rarely wear plain clothes in the open. Comfortable armor is my version of comfortable clothes. She frowned slightly. How can your armor be comfortable? As she asked this, she stepped into the corridor, glancing around a little to orient herself. Zan actually blushed. Walking around in normal clothes around non-Mandos is like being naked. She giggled and then tried to compose herself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. It's all right. Just next time, let me wear my armor, okay? Zan grinned. I take the helmet off around other Jedi. I do not need to frighten them, you know. She nodded. Deal. I honestly wasn't expecting you to show up in civvies at the General's. I know it had to be hard. She laid a hand on his shoulder for a moment. I'll be in my quarters. Any drink you'd like? Tea or such? I'm not much of a tea drinker. If you have calf, I'll bless you, he said. She grinned. I do have that, though I don't drink it much myself. How do you like it? She turned down the hall, waiting for his reply. Zan held the lift doors open for a split second to yell down the hall, "Black!" Chuckling, Callista waved at him to acknowledge that she'd heard before she placed her hand on the scanner plate beside the door and ducked into her apartment. For she was glad she tended to keep things neat. It had been a while since she'd had visitors. Humming to herself, she measured out the calf grounds into the percolator and set a couple of mugs on the counter as she started to make some tea for herself. Meanwhile, Zan had reached his apartment, quickly jettisoning the clothes he was wearing into the laundry and nearly running to his wardrobe to put on his coveralls and Beskar plates. He came across something they'd almost forgotten. It was something a friend of his had given him with his dying breath, but Zan had always felt awkward about having it. Then he thought of Callista and wondered if he gave it to her, if it would mean something. He took the item with him as he finished getting his Beskar gem together. After grabbing it, he ran down to the lift. A few minutes later, the pleasant scent of brewing calf filled the apartment, helping to give her energy. She didn't drink the stuff often, but she enjoyed the aroma of it. She straightened up and ducked into her room to change into a comfortable tunic and pants. Not that robes weren't comfortable, but they felt slightly too formal for her own apartment. She just wanted to relax. A minute later, Zan rang the chime for her apartment, the gift hidden behind him. "Come in," Callista called out as she stepped back into the common area. She'd brushed her hair out and put it up in a ponytail. Zan hit the controls to open the door and walked in wearing his well-maintained red Beskar gem with black trim. "Well, I feel better now, and I can see that you do as well." He grinned and then took the present from behind his back. It was a long sword with the blade currently pointed down to the floor. The hilt was beautiful, but plain otherwise. "I found this in my things, and I thought that you should have it." "Me?" Callista breathed in surprise, coming over to examine the blade. She'd never held a blade before, just her lightsaber. "It's beautiful." "It's called a Biscad, or iron sword in Basic, though Basic loses subtleties in translation." Callista smiled and carefully took the blade from Zan, turning it over to feel its weight and balance. "I don't know much about swords, but it looks very well made." Zan smiled. "It was my friend's blade. May he find rest in the Manda. He made it from his father's Beskar gem." Callista sensed that such a thing was important to him, and she nodded. "Thank you very much." She smiled before placing it carefully on the table. She was surprised by the gift, and she sensed that it meant a great deal to Zan. "I think your calf's ready," she said after a moment as she heard the machine beep. Slowly, she turned into the kitchenette and poured him a mugful of the steaming liquid before she handed it back to him. Zan smiled and nodded. "Vore, Calica." He caught the look on her face and explained, "It's thanks in Mandoa." He sat down in a free chair in the living area and sighed. "So now then, what's the first thing you want to know?" Smiling slightly, Callista wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic of her tea mug. "Well, you told me of the Wrestlenair. What is it about the Beskar gem that's so important?" She stumbled slightly over the pronunciation of the unfamiliar word. Zan smiled and repronounced it slowly for her. "Beskar gam. It means iron skin. Importance has to do with the fact that the Mandalorians are a warrior race. It stretches back to the times before Zim the Despot, before the Republic and the Jedi Order. Tell me, have you heard of the Dawarda Verda?" "Only in passing," she admitted after a pause to take a sip of her tea. "What is it, and what does it mean?" The translation means the warriors of the shadow, and it refers to the war between Coruscant's two ancient races, the Tong and the Zel. The Zel were what we'd call feral prehistoric humans who lived on Coruscant at the time. As to the Tongs, he paused. "Do you have an archives feed here?" She thought a moment. "Yes, I do." She rose, placing her teacup on the table, and went to the computer terminal on her desk. "I mostly use it to research healing techniques," she admitted, blushing slightly. Zan nodded and smiled. "Well, it's useful in that. He rose and walked over to the terminal on the desk before typing in the word Tong. A second later, the screen filled with an image of an ancient alien with armor that looked like stone and facial features not far removed from the style of the helmet Zan had worn earlier. This is a Tong, the birth race of the Mandawade. Her forehead creased slightly. I think I covered them briefly in my xenobiology class, but since no surviving members of the Tong have been seen, it's hard to do anything more. The Tong died out after the Mandalorian Wars when the Republic of the Day poisoned Mandiam with a genetic poison targeted at the Tong race. She sucked in a breath. I didn't know that. That's horrible. She leaned forward to read the article and paled slightly as she reached that part. Why would they do such a thing? It's wrong and goes against everything I stand for as a healer. Zan frowned. Back then, my people weren't exactly known for being truly honorable. Though the Mandawade were nothing more than butchers themselves in that age, we proudly declared that we destroyed over 100 worlds. Her face fell. She could almost feel the echoes of it in the Force. I'm glad the Mandalorians aren't like that anymore, she said softly. Canderous Ordo changed that, in part. You may know him better as Mandalore the Indomitable, companion of Revan and the Exile. Mm-hmm. Callista nodded. She did indeed know of that. During that time, much had changed for both the Jedi and the Mandalorians. She thought about that for a minute. Zan, I can't explain it, but it's just, well, it makes so much sense to me. Zan didn't respond, except to rub his chin and thought, it's not as easy as it sounds, Calica. A Mandawad's life differs from a Jedi's in a few regards. She frowned and sank down on the edge of the couch. What do you mean? Maybe if you explained? Her tone was confused. After a moment, she picked up the sword he'd given her, studying the metalwork as if it contained the answers. Zan scowled and thought, well, some things of a Jedi's life are the same. The constant testing, the idea of sacrifice for the goal to be achieved, dealing with others fairly. However, our methods differ. From the age of 3, a Mandalorian child is supposed to be able to handle and use a blaster properly. By the age of 6, a child is expected to have learned how to kill something. By the age of 13, they're considered an adult after all of the skills are achieved. But the harsh testing never ends. She fell silent then, still looking down at the sword in her hands. She knew how to kill, but she only did so if she absolutely had to. As a healer, she always looked for alternatives. What happens if they can't fulfill one of these objectives? Give me just 1 second. There we go. They're considered weak, less than Mandalorian Darmanda, and condemned to live outside Mandalorian society. There is room for healers, poets, and scholars in Mandalorian society, but each of us is a warrior and is held to the same standards. She chewed her lip nervously for a moment. I know how to use a blaster, but I haven't had much opportunity to use one. Most of my weapons training focused on lightsaber techniques, though I'm sure some of that could be adapted for other uses. She was silent for a long moment. I also know how to kill, though I only do so if necessary. Her words were softly spoken, and she rose to gaze out the window at the gardens below. Okay. Zan nodded. For Mandalorians, it can be different than Jedi think, though. We don't go after the truly innocent, the civilians and ones caught in a no-man's land who are forced to serve an organization they never wanted to. But if an enemy faces us, it's kill or be killed. She nodded. The last few conflicts between the Jedi and the Sith have been similar. We tried to spare the civilians, but the Sith didn't care who they hurt. We were spread too thin. Sorry. Zan shook his head. I know, but that's not what I mean. He then took a breath. If you faced a Sith Lord in battle and he got injured, what would you do? That stopped her. She remembered all too clearly what had happened on Corellia. Her face went still. I'd use the opening and dispatch him to protect myself and others, she said quietly, staring out the window. But if he threw down his blade and asked to be redeemed before that? She bit her lip. I don't know, she admitted after a moment. That's the decision Mandalorians don't mess around with. Dispatching an enemy is one thing. Redemption, though, is another matter. As Jedi, we have better insight into others. But if you were force blind and you came upon a Sith begging you for his life after he or she slaughtered others, what would your reaction be? I'd say no, she said. She stared out the window again, watching the daylight fade behind the tree canopy that peeked over the temple walls. Zan nodded. And that's why we are so misunderstood. A warrior is not a savage killer, an animal, but an enemy is an enemy. If real redemption comes for a Mandalorian, it's before a sentient steps onto the battlefield. If one does not take up arms against us and yet still looks for redemption before their own death, Mandalorians don't give redemption. Only the Manda and the Force can do so. Callista nodded again before she looked up at him with a small smile. It's a lot to take in, she said quietly, tracing her fingers over the intricate metalwork covering the sword's sheath across her knees. Zan barely smiled. That is why we don't mess around. Our battle circles have been known to have several deaths occur, and these are friendly challenges. You can imagine how serious we look at these. Again, she nodded, rising to set the sword carefully back on the table before she turned back to him. I want to learn. As you said, my singular focus on the healing arts is unbalanced. I want to fix that and get to know you better, she added quietly with a smile as she found her fingers resting lightly on his arm. Then, there's only one thing that stands in your way. It's called, in basic, the test of initiation. We refer to it in Mandoa as Moonbajir, or train hard. She nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. She could see it in his eyes. He wanted this for her as much as she did, but she could also sense a hint of worry. Taking a breath, she let it out, not breaking eye contact. I'll do whatever it takes, Zan. Know this, she told him firmly. Zan nodded and breathed out, clasping her hand in his. Then this should happen as soon as possible, and after the duel, I think we should get you and your friends a small taste of Mandalorian combat techniques. She smiled slightly. I think Mick would rather enjoy that. I know he wants to learn more about the Mandalorians, but I know how serious this is, she said softly. Zan smiled. It's serious, but also another lesson to learn. Enjoy each moment and take every opportunity when it comes. The training can wait until then. I'd rather be here with you now. She did smile then, and she could feel herself relaxing slightly. After a moment, she moved closer, laying her head against his chest. It was in just the right place. Zan held her close. Am I moving too fast for you, Calica? Mandos tend to move faster in this department than others. I'm not entirely sure, was her quiet response. It was fast, but it felt right. Zan held her close, but kept silent, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. It felt strange yet comforting to have her small frame surrounded by his armored form. It made her feel safe. She slowly turned her head again, breathing in the faint scent she associated with him, starship engines and some pungent cleaner. She wrinkled her nose at first, but the combination wasn't all that unpleasant. Her innate sense of smell was rather handy regarding her duties as a healer. Zan laughed. I need to clean this Beskar again a bit better, he said, as he saw her wrinkle her nose at him. She grinned and shook her head. I don't mind the smell of starship engines, but what is that more pungent smell? It's biting. She smiled slightly. It's not bad, it's just strong. Engine degreaser, Zan said, frowning. It's a rare fungal liquid that eats away grease. Organic, but pungent. She wrinkled her nose slightly. Organic is better, but spast that's strong. She trailed off, her fingers starting to trace the designs on his armor. I'll have to do something about that, he said. Perhaps I should get rid of it No, maybe you need to dilute it with something, she suggested, though she was somewhat more interested in the significance of his armor decorations at the moment. Perhaps, Zan said. Mandalorian armor designs depend on the individual more than the customs, though we do have them. She looked up at him, quirking an eyebrow. Was I thinking that loudly? Zan smiled. Empathy is one of my stronger skills. She blushed. I'm just not used to people being so forward about it. Zan scowled. Nisita. I'm sorry. No, don't be sorry. I like that you are. Everyone else is always walking on eggshells, it seems. Zan smiled. I know. I don't like that either. A gentle smile touched her lips. Is there anything you'd like to do for the evening while you're here? Zan thought. I'm not sure, unless you have an idea. She cleared her throat nervously. Well, it was a thought. Yes, I can tell. Zan laughed. Of course, I can always give you space to unwind if you need it, he added, gently. She looked down momentarily, her fingers tracing the patterns across his chest plate. It's all right. I want you here. It's nice to have someone around who doesn't make me feel like I'm being watched under a magnifying glass, she admitted softly as she gently pulled him over to the couch. Zan smiled and allowed himself to be pulled over to the couch. Once seated, he sighed. I shouldn't stay too long, though. We do have the duel tomorrow, and then I have to start your training for your Vergoten. She swallowed. It wasn't so much that she was scared. Well, maybe she was. She didn't know what to expect. But that didn't keep her from wanting to go through with it. What exactly will be involved? She asked softly. Tomorrow, we should start with some hand-to-hand combat, striking, grappling, that type of thing. Mandalorian hand-to-hand is different than Terras Kasi. She raised an eyebrow. How do you mean? She reached blindly for her tea mug, guiding Zan's calf to him with the force. I think it got cold, she said apologetically. Zan didn't mind. He wasn't interested in the calf anymore anyway. Mandalorian techniques are meant to disable and kill if you have no other weapon. Terras Kasi can be used, but Jedi usually use it to transition into other weapons like sabers. Mandalorian hand-to-hand is a skill on its own. I know quite a bit of the Terras Kasi, but I've never gotten beyond the first level of training. She sighed and then chuckled, but it will be something new for me. I like learning new things, she told him with a smile as she sipped at her tea, lowering his calf gently to the table again when he showed no interest. Zan smiled. Using the force, he grabbed the cup, floating it to the sink and dumping out the cold calf. Then he brought it to the calf pot, pulling out the pot and poured himself a fresh cup. He then pulled it back over to himself using the force and set it next to him on the table. I don't do that often, but I didn't want to get up. She just grinned. Some would consider that frivolous use of the force, but I don't. I do the same thing when studying or busy in the medical ward. Zan frowned. And that's called Jedi nonsense. The force is a central part of our lives. Stay! Hello! If we rely all our skills on the force, it becomes a powerful ally. Frivolous use? No. The only thing frivolous is using it when you shouldn't. And I had to go to reason. I know, right? Isn't it awesome? She nodded. Precisely. She drained the last of her tea and sat back down on the couch, tucking her feet beneath her. The duel's at 1400. What time did you want to meet? Let's meet at 1000 hours for breakfast at my quarters. I mean, I make a mean breakfast. Callista grinned. I'd like that very much. I usually have cereal and tea in the morning because I'm so busy. You're fine. You're fine. Just finishing up the chapter. No worries. Zan nodded. Time for that to change a little. He hesitated and kissed her hand before draining his calf quickly. I was thirsty. She blinked slightly in surprise, but smiled as he kissed her hand. You know, you can scald the lining of your throat and tongue that way. Zan shrugged. You get used to it in my line of work. Calista just shook her head, chuckling. I guess so. She looked around her quarters momentarily, trying to think of a place to display the sword that he'd given her. Zan picked up on her thoughts again. Don't get used to displaying it, Calica. You may need it to be functional if you pass your Vergoten. She blushed. Sorry. Then she looked at him. Sorry, hold on. I'll learn to use a sword as well. A sword, a blaster, a ripper, flamethrowers, bare hands and feet. You must become a well-rounded warrior, close-range, sniper distance, piloting, and more. She smiled a little. My piloting skills are passable. I can repair a hyperdrive. I had to do so once it blew in the middle of a run. Sand smiled. Repair skills will be good. We'll have to tighten up your piloting sometime, though. His face grew serious. If you take this path, while your healing abilities will still be your primary field, you may find yourself in the field more than at the med center. She nodded quietly. I've had the sense... Oops. Sorry. Ad break. Sorry. Sorry. No, you're fine. So I have an ad break. So welcome in, Stay. Good to see you. Yeah. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. You're welcome. Alright. And we're back. Yay! Alright. She nodded quietly. I've had the sense that would happen sooner or later anyway. She sighed. Besides, Jedi robes make me stand out like a hut at a state dinner, and they get in the way. Zan laughed. Some huts like state dinners, especially when they get thirds. But you'll still stick out sometimes. Beskar Gam is bad for that. Yeah, so I noticed, she replied with a lopsided grin as she lightly elbowed him in the ribs. Zan laughed again. So, 1,000 hours then? Master's residency, room 215. Alec, she answered slowly, pronouncing the word carefully as she squeezed his hand. It looks like formal robes again for me, she said as she rolled her eyes slightly. No, don't worry about that. Come in comfortable clothes and bring robes for the duel, Zan said. That way you can relax for a while before getting back into the monkey suit. She smiled and made a face. I can see a purpose for them sometimes, but it just gets old, especially when I'm here. Though when I visit the general, I always wear my robes. Just something about Ari that made Callista feel the need to be respectful. She couldn't bring herself to address Ari by her first name. I'll show you tomorrow the Mandalorian solution to that problem. That way, you'll get the best of both worlds, Zan smiled. She returned the smile. I'd like that. I feel just clumsy sometimes. Zan nodded. I have normal robes myself. I just never use them. So what do you do then? Callista asked curiously. She could feel herself starting to get tired, but she could wait a bit longer. She was enjoying his company. I'll show you tomorrow, Zan said with a wink. Meanwhile, we both better get some shut-eye. Yeah, she said carefully, stifling a yawn. Then she leaned forward and hugged him firmly, burying her face against his shoulder as she inhaled his scent once more. Zan held her close for a second and then leaned his forehead against hers for another second or two. Returche chez me, Caliga. I'll see you at 1000. Sleep well, Zan, she replied softly as she leaned into him for a moment. Zan eventually broke off the embrace and headed out the door after saying a cheery goodnight once again. He headed off to his quarters, highly content and knowing his life had changed entirely, and for the better. Callista watched him go until her door closed on his back. She could feel him moving down the hall to the lift. Humming softly to herself, she rose and gathered the 2 mugs, putting them into the cleaning station before she moved off to her room and changed into her sleep clothes. The next few days were going to be interesting. Einar pulled the robe tighter around his frame as he walked through the lower levels of Coruscant. It was a new day, but down here things always stayed dark. He hadn't slept at all. After Ari's dinner party, he rang up the police enforcement office and put himself on shift for the lower levels in the neighborhood. He needed the time to think, and some hands-on work eased his mind, which was exactly what he hated. Or what he needed, I think is what it's supposed to be. He blamed Ari for his misfortune since he became her Padawan all those years ago. She had led him into countless battles. Him and Kevin side by side, Morton, Aloran, Mark, friends he'd long since lost contact with. Kevin had died on one of those missions. His closest friend for years died on that forsaken rock, and with it a part of his innocence had died as well. He was taught that being a Jedi meant being a keeper of the peace, a scholar, and a teacher, but his reputation could have been better. Bryn Jade had left. She had been his most promising student. After that, there were a few he'd helped guide, but he had refused to take on a Padawan until Kevin's only son came of age. Ari had asked him to train the boy, and Einar accepted, but he wasn't sure he was helping him at all. Turlon was about to start his trials today, and Einar was working. He was policing the streets instead of the Padawans and knights who usually did the job, but he felt like he needed to move to do some actual work, something that he hated. It was raining, and he pulled the hood of his robe over his head and snuck into the small side street. There was something in the air, a shade of mistrust and anger. He kept to the shadows, moving slowly through the garbage bins and stepping lightly as he moved closer and closer to the noise of people talking loudly, arguing about something. He crept closer and put his hand on the hilt of his lightsaber. 3 men and a Wookiee were arguing loudly with blasters armed and pointed at each other. He stretched out his senses and tried to probe the men for information, but a cloud was still hanging over him, numbing his senses. He looked around for bystanders, but the street was clear, so he moved forward slowly, preparing to intervene. He had to move fast. Turlon was probably waiting to see him. And that's the end of chapter 9. Alright. Oh goodness. I just looked at the time. Anyway. Why are you telling me no, Gio? Why are you telling me no? Oh. Alright. You're very welcome. Well, that was fun. And we left kind of on a cliffhanger. Sorry. It's been going well. Got through 3 chapters. They were a bit longer than I was anticipating. These particular stories I haven't actually looked at for, I'd say, at least 10 years. Yeah. So the chapters were a bit longer than I was anticipating in this particular section. So stream went a little bit long, but I'm okay with that. So, if anybody has any questions, comments, if you'd like anything translated that I didn't translate, please feel free to ask. Yes. A late dinner is very good. I'm going to take a peek and see if anybody is streaming right now. Let's see. Since I'm reading Star Wars, should we go read Ronin? I mean, we can hang out for a little bit, but I do have to go to bed before too long. So, that was fun. All the suspense and the perfect music for the suspense. I'm glad you guys are enjoying the stories. Thank you. I got that from somebody on Etsy. If you are curious, you can check out my about panels below. I believe that has information on where I got my graphics from. Yeah. Let's see. Yep. Down at the bottom in my credits. So my virtual background is from Plasma Graphics on Etsy. It's pretty awesome. And it totally fits with the vibe of my stream, which is awesome. I was looking for something that was spacey, but also library-esque, and it's both. You can't see behind me, but there's a window in the background with a planet. So it was pretty cool. Oh, that's right. That's right. I don't think that you've been here since I did the changeover, actually. So that's cool. But yeah, so there's a lot of Mandoa words that I've been using tonight. So if anybody is ever curious about any of that I didn't translate in while I was reading, you can always use the translate command. That is actually a command, so I try to pay attention to that. And that will notify me that you guys are curious what it means. My pronunciation is absolutely atrocious, but I do try. So Yes, I it's been a long time since I actually yes. It's been a long time since I actually did a lot of work with the Mandoa, so I'm extremely rusty. I don't know where it is right now, but I do actually have, wait, one sec. Don't have it handy, but I do actually have a Mandoa dictionary. I just don't know where it is at the moment. But that is really cool because it has the pronunciation in it too. So that if I can find that, it would be really helpful. Also, yes, the cat at the bottom is adorable. That's another thing that I got from Etsy. I figured it made sense since all of my emotes are cute little white cats. So I found that. There's a bunch of little commands that you can do with the cat. Like that one. Yeah. If you look in the panels on my stream page, there's down at the bottom under the chat commands, there's the ones for the stream cat. Did that one actually work? Okay, it did. I just wasn't looking. Yeah. That's how I'm feeling right now. Yes, you guys can feel free to play with that cat to your heart's content. That's why it's there. I just wanted something that was really cute, and I found that. So, yeah. I don't have tons of things that are interactive, mainly because this is a... I know! He popped in like right as I was finishing the chapter and I about died. Yeah. I don't have... Yeah, but like I was saying, I don't have a ton of flashy things, mainly because this is a reading stream, so there are a few. I have some self-care redeems, hydrate, stretch, snack, that kind of thing. But, yes. Do you guys have a recommendation for who we should read out to? Yes. It's not supposed to pop up and say I rated, but anyway. There's my raid command. Oh, yeah, let's go raid him. Give me 1 second. Where's my raid? Yeah, let's go raid. Ooh, playing The Witcher 3. Oh, so many good people I could raid. Oh my goodness. I was just saying well, yeah, let's go raid VG Silverhand. There's my raid command in the chat if you guys want. Oh. Did I turn links off again? Sorry. Ooh. Ooh, okay. Let's go say hi to Exus. That'd be fun. So, I'm gonna drop my raid command in chat one more time. And the cat's gonna say that I'm raiding, but I'm not. Oh, that's such a good storyline too. I love the agent storyline. It's so mind trippy. Alright. Let's go say hello. Alrighty, let me get that set up. Oh, I agree, honestly. It's extremely well written. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be playing with the cat all night. Gio's just gonna be p if you're around, anybody else actually, if you're around on Wednesday, I will be streaming again on Wednesday night, 7 to 9 Eastern. And we will be continuing our story. Oh no, take it easy, Ivory. Definitely. Definitely. Be careful. Rest yourself. Yeah, definitely take it easy. Back issues are nothing to mess with. I know that personally. Back issues can be really, really rough. So please take care of yourself. And I'll be thinking about you. Alright, I'm going to get this raid started. Yeah. Yes, definitely. Definitely thinking about you, my dude. Alright. Everybody ready? I'm gonna start this raid. Have a great night, guys. Bye. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight. I really appreciate you. And hopefully I will see you all back on Wednesday. There we go. Good night, guys.